All right, greetings and salutations, everybody, and welcome back after a lengthy absence. I'm Thersites the Historian, and joining me this evening are a trio of Civil War experts. We're going to be discussing part 2 of the Atlanta campaign. We're going to be looking at Atlanta after the transition of power from Joseph E. Johnston to John Bell Hood. So now the fighting will be in Atlanta proper, and it's going to get intense, and there will be some not great maps, but better than nothing. So our guests tonight are Dave Powell. He was here last time. He is the author of a number of books in the Civil War, including some upcoming works on Atlanta. We have Sean, of course, whom you are all familiar with, or I'm sure the vast majority of you are. And we have Luke Freet, who was also here last time and sometimes goes...
Thank you.
Thank you. I tried my best with the math, by the way. These were the best ones I could pull off of Google.
Yeah, no, you found
honestly,
some pretty good stuff.
I didn't have much time to really look through. I could have gone through all the books I had, but
because I was also looking for things, and yeah, some of these are not super well drawn out.
Yeah, I'm not happy with the ones I found on like Peachtree Creek Azure Church and Bald Hill, but they'll do.
All right, so what is our plan of attack this evening? What is our grand strategy?
Well, I think first we should discuss the cavalry situation because we kind of skipped over cavalry action in the previous one because honestly there wasn't that much. It's about here that David Evans begins his coverage of the cavalry in his excellent book Sherman's Horsemen. To summarize, the situation for the cavalry on both sides is subpar generally. Sherman is a lot like Grant in that he is not that well versed in cavalry actions, even this late in the war. He does have a cavalry corps, but it's led by Washington Elliott, who basically is a desk general sitting all the way back in headquarters, not commanding the field. So there's basically no cavalry head for Sherman. So his command is divided.
I was going to say, I think that Elliott is probably superseded by Sherman himself, who all through the campaign is issuing orders directly to all 4 cavalry divisions. And so only periodically does he go circle back to tell Elliott, hey, do something. So I think, we don't have much on General Elliott, but I suspect that he spends the months of May through August of 1864 pretty frustrated.
Certainly, you can imagine that. Evans himself doesn't consider Elliott that highly either. Most of my descriptions come from him. In terms of the 4 cavalry heads that Sherman does have, First Division is commanded by Edward McCook, another member of the Fighting McCooks, who Evans considers a poor cavalryman, or at least a poor field commander, and this will be evident during the later raid that he'll conduct with Stoneman. Stoneman is also here, formerly commander of the Army of Potomac's Cavalry Corps. He's been transferred west and given command of the Cavalry Division of Shawfield's Army of the Ohio, which is interesting considering Washington Elliott's commanding a corps while he's commanding a random division. Yet Elliott is junior to him in rank.
Stoneman ranks pretty much every other cavalryman in the Army.
Yeah. Then there's Judson Kilpatrick commanding the new 3rd Division. Kilpatrick is pretty infamous. We won't get into him because Sean and Thersites covered him in a previous stream. He's not that heavily involved in the campaign this far, and he won't be until August. He's wounded in May in the early cavalry actions, and his division is absolutely tiny and left to guard the rear for most of this stage of the campaign. The largest division, the The largest division in the Corps is 2nd Division under Kenner Girard, who commanded a regiment of Zouaves at Gettysburg, was transferred to the cavalry. He commands a good division overall. Minty Sabre Brigade, Eli Long's Ohio Brigade, and the famous Lightning Brigade, now under Colonel Miller. But Girard is not considered highly by Sherman. He gets quite upset with him when Johnston withdraws from Kennesaw, and Kenner Girard is a bit lazy in the pursuit, or at least in Sherman's eyes is. And so Sherman has no real great cavalry captain at his disposal.
Yeah, he doesn't have a very high opinion of Girard last time I
remember. Girard has his command because he was a student of Thomas's when Thomas was still a teacher at West Point. And so he was kind of his protege. And so Thomas always argues in his favor whenever Sherman gets angry about Girard's actions.
Gotcha.
Yeah, meanwhile, on the Confederate side, there's they also have divided command, one corps and an independent division. Wheeler, of course, commands a corps, about 8,000 horsemen. Wheeler, this far in the war, has been a mixed bag. When he was in brigade command during the Perryville campaign, he was superb. Did a good job during the Murfreesboro operations. But once he gets in corps command, that's where things go south for him. Does poorly at Tullahoma. Infamously gets defeated at Shelbyville.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Then during the Chickamauga campaign, he fails in his job to keep keep Bragg informed of Rosecrans' crossing of the Tennessee, forcing him to abandon Chattanooga. Launches a raid after Chickamauga that doesn't do much help to either side.
Doesn't do a lot of help for the Confederate cavalry.
Certainly not.
He basically guts his corps.
Yeah.
On the October raid.
Yeah. The problem is that Wheeler can't be replaced because there's no real good candidate to replace him. Forrest is
really?
Yeah.
You don't think Wharton would have been better?
He probably would have been better, but Wharton was gone by this point.
We can't find a replacement. There's just no replacements. As if there's some sort of finite leadership pool that they're drawing from. The truth is that they're kind of committed to certain implacable positions that aren't going to move. I don't remember if it's Woodworth or one of the other Civil War historians talking about Confederate command in the West. They're essentially at Army command. We're still arguing about the same four people: Beauregard, Johnson, Lee. Who can
Bragg.
be effective in 1861, who can be effective in 1865, and the same is true for the cavalry. There's a number of promising cavalry divisional and brigade commanders even. John Wharton is probably the best among them, but Wheeler at Corps Command does not excel, and he doesn't excel in 1863 or arguably in 1864, the second half of the campaign anyway, and certainly not in 1865. So
yeah. I will say he has two good division commanders under him, Humes and Kelly. Kelly's interesting because he is, in fact, the youngest Confederate general of the entire war. He was promoted after Chickamauga at age 23. He was younger than William P. Roberts. And also, there's also another division commander, Martin, but he was terrible, and by July he's sick and out of command, replaced by Alfred Iverson, who is...
He's not sick. He's arrested.
Oh yeah. It's been a while, hasn't it?
Yeah. He's arrested on August 13th or 14th for failing to come to Wheeler's aid when Wheeler has launched his next raid. and then he's replaced by Iverson. I personally am kinder towards Will Martin than most historians have been. I think part of the problem there is that Wheeler has an eye all the time for making sure that no rivals rise to his sort of any position to threaten him, and Wharton and Martin are both taken care of that way.
Yeah, and that's my interpretation of him as well. I'm a bit kinder to Martin than the stuff I've done on Tullahoma. And I agree. Wheeler's essentially just making sure he doesn't have a rival, which he definitely had to do with John Wharton, which is why he gets shipped out west.
Yeah. Meanwhile, there's another division under William H. Red Jackson, who I can't remember whether or not he's a relative of Stonewall Jackson or not. There's a couple Jacksons who were and who weren't, but I can't remember.
He's not a relative.
He's not.
Yeah. Okay. Anyways, Jackson. He came as a good sizable division of about 4,000 to 500 horsemen. So sizable in its own right, almost as big as the entirety of Wheeler's corps. I believe during the campaign, generally Wheeler was kept on the right flank while Jackson was kept on the left to screen the army's flanks. That was the general dispositions throughout the campaign from since they joined around May until basically Wheeler sent off on his raid. Even then, Jackson still covers the left flank because that's where the main action is by that point of the campaign, which will. Though I'd say Johnston is better suited overall because he has an actual cavalry head, even if he is not best in the world. He's actually effective in the field in some regard. Because Wheeler does do well at Pickett's Mill, and of course he does. We'll discuss this. He does manage to destroy Stoneman and McCook during their raid, which I consider the last strategic victory of the Confederates during the entire war.
Really?
Yeah, before that was Second Kernstown, and so July 30th and 31st. I don't recall another big victory for the rebels, unless something around Petersburg. Though I don't see anything they did there that changed dynamics there. I'll make that argument when we get there, but.
There was the Union made a major push for Richmond in October 1864 that was stopped.
Yeah.
But let's not quibble about that one. Let's go into the actions then.
All right. So, we're gonna skip over the crossing of the Chattahoochee. We will bring. Should we discuss the Roswell incident?
No, we can't skip the crossing of the Chattahoochee.
Okay.
Some people think it's like when the campaign is essentially won.
That's what I would say.
Oh yeah, that is the case. Yeah, there's a bunch of actions north of the Chattahoochee that we are going to skip over, like Smyrna Vining Station, I believe. Barely any meaningful combat. Anyways, Johnston falls back to the Chattahoochee and has his back to the river. He had his chief of artillery, Francis Shoup, construct a massive line using a very interesting fortification scheme called Choupade. I'll leave this to Powell to explain this if he is willing.
Sure. Francis Shoup looked at the campaign so far and realized that what Johnston's strategy really needed was to free up a lot of infantry so that he could launch counteroffensives, which is the whole point of Johnston's strategy. Counterpunching, wear down the enemy, thin him by detachments, and then attack him. So Shoup devised a line, sort of a semicircle north of the Chattahoochee around the railroad bridge, the Western and Atlantic Bridge, that worked on some 31 or 32 fortified diamond-shaped earthworks. And they required a garrison of 80 to 100 men. They were supported by artillery. And so they could cover an approximately 3.5 mile line with a minimum of force, and thus freeing up the bulk of Johnston's army, which about the time that Johnston crossed the Chattahoochee, he still had somewhere between 65,000 and 70,000 troops. He had a sizable army. The Federals, when they crossed the Etowah, Sherman estimated his cutting edge combat force at about 85,000. After Kennesaw and after as they're approaching the Chattahoochee, that's closer to 80,000. So you see the relative imbalance of forces isn't the dramatic difference that, say, was at Dalton or comes later in the campaign of 2 to 1 odds. The problem was that when the troops occupied the Chupades, the first thing they did was say, we don't understand this. And they started to dig conventional trenches. Even Johnston didn't really seem to get it, and only held the Chupade line for a couple of days before he ended up retreating across the Chattahoochee. He seemed to view it only as a stop guard, rear guard position, as opposed to the way Francis Shoup envisioned it, which was a fortified bridgehead that they could be held. If Sherman crossed above or below, then the Confederates could concentrate the bulk of their force and counterattack. And as much as Johnston paid lip service to that strategy, he never really executed it. And I think the Chupades or the river line, as it's also commonly called, and there still are a couple of these around in historic parks and places. You can see a couple of them. Johnston.
I think there's one in like a housing development that I saw on Google Maps once.
Yeah, there's a local county park that has one. There's a couple in housing developments. They're here and there. They're around. And in the past few years, Georgia has made a little bit more effort to try and preserve them, local historical organizations and things. So today it's another mound of earth. You have to kind of really know what you're looking at before you understand it. But arguably Johnston never really understood it either. So.
Yeah, I'm still sort of stunned from what you pointed out last time, Dave, that Sherman or Johnston's concept of how to defend a river line is to be on the wrong side of it. And have your troops with their back to the river, so if you get beaten, you have to surrender or drown.
Yeah, he does this constantly. He does this all the way to Bentonville, which I would love to do a damn stream on the North Carolina campaign, because that one is fucking wild, to say the least, when it comes to insane decision making on the Confederate part. Beyond just continuing to fight it out, of course. But, that's a rant for another time. Anyways, Sherman decides to, instead of course, attacking this defensive line, he does what he normally does and decides to turn it. So he sends Kenner Gerard's cavalry division, plus, I believe, Schofield's corps. I don't know how it's pronounced. Schofield, Schofield, Schofield?
I thought it was Schofield.
I pronounce it Schofield.
Yeah.
Same.
All right.
Wait, do you guys hear me right now?
Yeah.
Yes, we do.
Yes. I hear.
Do I sound fine right now?
Yeah, you sound...
Because I'm using the new stuff.
Okay, yeah, you sound louder now, too.
Yeah.
I sound fine? Okay, gotcha.
Yeah.
No, one I was thinking of, I do want to mention real quick, because this goes back to a point Dave made about, Confederate personnel mistakes. And Francis Shoup has one of, if not the most unusual, career of a Confederate officer in the war. And I mention this because at Shiloh, he was artillery commander, essentially commanded an artillery brigade, 3 batteries, and ended up massing cannons at several points during the battle and just did an excellent job. And by the way, his account of Shiloh is funny because there's a lot of sarcasm in it. A lot of sarcasm. But anyway, and for a time he was a chief of artillery for Hardee. And then he gets sent to Arkansas and commands an infantry division at Prairie Grove and does a very bad job. Okay. So really bad job there. Then commands a brigade of Louisiana troops in Vicksburg, which weren't too engaged. That, and then artillery chief under Johnston. It's an unusual career, but one thing I'm finding with the Shiloh research is that Confederate artillery, I think, did actually really well at Shiloh. And when I'm looking at it, most of their battery commanders that were there, a lot of them don't show up after Shiloh. They get transferred elsewhere, and Shoup's an example of that. Somebody like him had stayed with the artillery of the Army of Tennessee. It could have been a lot better than how it turned out, I think.
Yeah.
But instead they got him commanding infantry in Arkansas and then in Vicksburg. Yeah. And beyond that, of course, he was from Indiana, and he said he joined the Confederacy because he believed in their aristocratic virtues.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's an unusual guy. He's an unusual guy. He had this weird career, and he really is an example of an officer that was poorly used for a significant portion of the war.
Yeah, I know there's one colonel in Forest Cavalry Corps, Clark Bartow, who was from Ohio, but when he went south, he fell in love with the plantation system and sided with the Confederacy.
Yeah, I don't think in the case of Shoup it was necessarily. He doesn't strike me from what I've read on the thing that was like rabidly pro-slavery or anything. I think also he might have had like a wife who was from the South, which that, and whenever somebody's like, so why'd that guy like fight for the other side? I'm typically like, it's probably who they married.
Yeah. Pemberton married a Virginian, and Thomas married a Northerner. So,
the one quick exception to that would be William Terrell, I believe, who led a brigade at Perryville and died. Also another guy, he commanded his artillery battery at Shiloh superbly. I mean, easily one of the best single battery performances I've ever read about. And then make him infantry commander, and he's just very bad at it.
Yeah.
But his entire family stayed pro-Confederate, and he had a brother who ended up becoming a general and dying. But I think he was one of the only ones I've been able to run into. I just finished a book on him that was really good.
Oh yeah. We'll talk more about Shoup later on because he figures prominently as
Chief
the campaign
staff.
goes. Yeah, we'll get to that. Anyways, so Sherman sends Girard's cavalry along with Schofield's corps over to
Schofield.
Roswell. I will just continue to mispronounce. I will continue to mispronounce it from here on forward. That is my promise. Anyways,
you could just call him Old Cross Eyes.
The general commanding 23rd Corps is sent over to Roswell. At Roswell, there's an incident at Roswell I would like to discuss. There was this, I forget the name of it though, but there was this, I believe, cotton factory or clothes factory or something.
The Roswell woolen mills.
How about I leave this to you, Dave, because I think you remember more of this than I do from the months since I've read Evan's book.
Well, Kennedy Garrard gets to Roswell. His cavalry are in the lead. Actually, the 23rd Corps has crossed somewhat below Roswell and established a bridgehead, and then Sherman sends Garrard up to Roswell to secure a ford there, which he's going to follow up with the Army of Tennessee, the 15th and 16th Corps. And he's expanding his bridgehead, and Garrard gets to Roswell, and they do the usual. One thing to remember is that the Chattahoochee was kind of an industrial river basin for the Confederacy, because it had a lot of fast-flowing water and a lot of rapids. Its fall from the highlands of Georgia down into lower terrain is fairly dramatic. So while it doesn't have giant waterfalls, it does have a fast-flowing river, and so a lot of mills, a lot of water mills and water power, all power industry up and down the Chattahoochee. And one of those, one of the largest is the Roswell woolen mills, which were producing Confederate cloth, cloth for the Confederacy. And Garrard gets there and he burns the mills, and there's approximately 300 mostly female workers in the mills. Many of them have their children with them. They have basically been hired or brought on board to work in the mills because obviously manpower is at a premium and is in the Army. Garrard sends a wire back to Sherman and says, "What do I do with these workers?" And Sherman takes a very unusual approach. Basically says, "Well, they're working for the Confederacy. They're war material. It's almost as if he views them as a mix between soldiers and contrabands." And so he basically he tells Garrard to send them to Marietta, where the Union railhead currently exists, and then they'll be sent north. And they do that. They're moved by wagon to Marietta. They're shipped north to Nashville, where Brigadier General Whipple, who's head of Sherman's rear echelon headquarters in Nashville, really the military division of Mississippi headquarters, the main headquarters, says, "What do I do with these people?" And then they're moved on to Louisville and ultimately north of the Ohio. They're treated a lot like Confederates who have taken the oath, which, if you're a Confederate deserter, you turn yourself into the Federals. You can actually have freedom of maneuverability. You can have. You won't be consigned to a prison camp if you take the oath and agree to stay north of the Ohio River. Unfortunately, these women, they don't have much choice in the matter. They're just shipped north and dispersed to wherever they can find employment or whatever they can do in the north. There's been some writing about what happened to them after the war, or some of them found their way back, but not many. It's kind of it's a bizarre interpretation on Sherman's part, but it falls to Sherman. He's the one who says, "Yeah, ship north."
I will add, I think we kind of glossed over this detail, but there was an incident before all this happened that the owner of the mill was worried that since, of course, that his mill would get burned down and he'd lose all his diplomatic immunity due to neutrality. But of course, because the inspectors go and they find all these cloth covered with like CSA markings, they say, "Oh, you're breaching the rules of war by producing this stuff in this country," and that was part of the justification that Sherman had for doing what he did.
Yeah, there's you'll actually find that time and again throughout the South. Another famous example is the copper rolling mill up in Cleveland, Tennessee, which had an English manager before the war. And so the ownership said basically, "Well, why don't you take it over?" Didn't help.
Of course.
Yeah, you're producing war material. It's the Etowah Iron Works along the Etowah River outside of Cartersville were entirely leased to the Confederacy. the Federals were wise to this and said, there's no question that destroying the mills was a legitimate aspect of war. They were producing war material. The questionable part is what Sherman agreed to do with the 300 plus, again, largely female mill workers that he just arbitrarily shipped north, civilians all.
Yeah.
Sorry.
So, all right, continuing on. So, after taking Roswell, Sherman plans to cross around Soaps Creek nearby. This is led particularly by Garrard's division with support from McCook's cavalrymen. Maybe at Soap Creek, but maybe at another one. This is all kind of fuzzy, but at one of the crossings, the Wilder's Brigade, now under Colonel Abram Miller, they cross under fire, and armed with Spencer rifles, they're able to duck into the water in order to reload and avoid, being shot before coming up, tipping their barrels down to get the water out before shooting. This, of course, shocking the rebel defenders because, this is not something that they were familiar with old school black powder weapons, with, unclosed cartridges. So, another example of, the revolution of firearms going forward, of course. Most of Garrard's division was armed with Spencers, and some units of the other cavalry divisions were armed with Spencers, though most of them were armed with Sharps or Burnsides or Maynard carbines. Just a little note. At another crossing, Colonel James Brownlow of the Unionist 1st Tennessee decided the crossing was too treacherous to do a frontal, so he and a band of his men, stripped completely naked, cross at a smaller ford and take the rebels by surprise in an assault while completely bare naked, sans their cartridge boxes and rifles. Just a little odd incident. But because of this, Sherman gains a lodgment on the south bank of the Chattahoochee, and this is what compels Johnston to retreat. He could have sent a division or a corps to dealt with this, as Powell mentioned, as with the defensive scheme planned, but he didn't. He just decided with, and so he withdraws into the defense around Atlanta, south of Peachtree Creek. And here's where I'd say the campaign really turns, and Johnston's command is essentially. How about I leave this? Powell, would you rather discuss this point, or want to leave it to me?
Well, I think before getting to that, I do want to mention one quick thing. Is that what's interesting at this point, it should also be noted, is that there's a lot of course, the pressure is mounted on Johnston for the reasons we've said. Sherman's now at Atlanta, at the gates of Atlanta. He's crossed the Chattahoochee. All he's won is just defensive victories, which is just not enough. And he hasn't quite figured out how to counter what Sherman does. I would also like to note that Sherman at this time is also under increasing pressure. Remember, the campaign in Georgia is essentially a secondary campaign, and in large part is meant to make sure that Johnston cannot reinforce Lee, because they're absolutely terrified of what happened to Rosecrans at Chickamauga. But at this point, keep in mind, this is a few weeks after Grant and Meade have failed to take Petersburg with the second battle of what I called the first one. The first one was the skirmish. Got the first battle of Petersburg. They failed to capture the city, suffer horrendous casualties. They have not broken Lee. They have not captured Richmond. They've lost most of the battles. Morale in the North is extremely low at this point. Right. And following that up, what happens next? The Battle of Jerusalem Plank Road. Now, not a particularly big battle, but in some ways one of the most troubling battles for the Union, because the Second Corps is routed from the field. This is the first time that they actually lose flags in battle, for instance. So That's what I remember. But anyway, the casualty ratio for that battle is also really bad. The Union loses anywhere from 2,700 to 3,000 men. The Confederates lost 600 men attacking. Simply put, Meade's army is no longer capable of hard, sustained combat.
Yeah.
And they're still going to try to take Petersburg, even with the crater. Although I would argue with the crater, Grant and Meade really didn't take it seriously, and Grant kind of took it seriously, but only at the very last minute. But they're stymied at Petersburg, and especially after the crater, what you start seeing with Grant is that he's no longer thinking of, how do we capture Richmond and or Petersburg. He starts to think much more limited after the crater. So suddenly, the pressure's on Sherman. He has to take Atlanta.
And
and also, I should point this out. As this is happening, Jubal Early is marching into Maryland. He fights the battle at Monocacy, rally force under Lew Wallace, and is threatening Washington, D.C. during this time, July 11th and 12th.
Grant actually warned Sherman.
Yeah, we'll get to that. But yeah, this is, I say it's in July that the Confederate cause in 64 is at its high point. Of course, not overall, but in this year, this is the grand strategy really shows its best.
But also in this regard, 1864 is the flip of 1863. 1863, the only Confederate strategic victory, I would argue, major strategic victory is holding Charleston, and the only outed from the field and chased off.
Yeah.
So, anyways, I guess we want to do the Johnston part, or do we want to do Sherman's maneuvers?
Probably should talk about Johnston's removal at this point, because by this point, Sherman is resting until July 17th, which is the day that Johnston gets removed. So, I guess I'll start this. So, by this point, Davis is practically done with Johnston, and so he sends Bragg down to Atlanta as his military advisor to inspect the situation, report on Johnston's command. Bragg gathers together a report that condemns Johnston's handling of the situation, saying that he was going to abandon Atlanta and that Hardee was in line with him, which probably wasn't true in the grand scheme of things. Bragg probably wrote that just because he hated Hardee for all the scheming he had done against him. Hardee, by the way, really wanted the command of the army by this point, depending on whether or not AP Stewart is correct in his account. We'll get to that. But Bragg suggests Hood for command at this rate. Interestingly enough, this gets brought up a lot, but the letter he sends to Davis does not reach him before Johnston is removed. It's sent by mail in a mail package that doesn't get to Davis until near the end of July, well after the decision's made. What really gets Johnston removed is his reply to Davis's message on July 16th. Davis asks bluntly for Johnston, stop being vague, tell me what your plan to defeat Sherman is. And Johnston's reply can be summed up as this: I am going to react to whatever Sherman's going to do, and I am planning to hold Atlanta with a minimal garrison. Now, this could mean two things. Either he was going to hold it with a garrison while he made a big, wide flanking maneuver with the rest of his army to strike Sherman, or this meant that he was going to abandon Atlanta, which is what Davis feared he was going to do. The fact that he left it vague leaves us up for interpretation. We have no idea for sure whether or not he was going to attack.
By the way, right in the middle of that, Johnston sends a telegram to Davis that says, I think you ought to evacuate Camp Sumter in Andersonville.
Oh, right. There's that, too. That also plays into
100 miles south of Atlanta.
Colors Davis's opinion. I know Robert Jenkins in his Peachtree Creek book argued that, yeah, Johnston was planning an offensive, but it's like, if that's true, he definitely should have communicated that with Davis. The only defense I've seen for Johnston's vagueness in his reply is that he was afraid that the message would somehow leak, and that somehow Sherman would find out about his plans before he could enact them, which I find shockingly insane, at least in this rate of military intelligence.
I think it's fair to say that Johnson was closer to an attack than he had been since Resaca, but by the same token, he did not have a definite plan.
Indeed, yeah. I do not buy that his later report that he had fully planned out the attack at Peachtree Creek, and so he deserves all the credit, and that Hood bungled his plan. I do not believe that in the slightest. And neither does Earl J. Hess in his book on that battle. Yeah. But
or Steve Davis. But always keeping in mind that if it's something negative about Johnston, Steve Davis will give it the thumbs up.
Yeah.
That's true.
Yeah. And honestly, I'm basically in the same camp, because I'm gonna make the argument now. Hood's gonna do a better job in Army Command than Johnson does. That's gonna be my thesis going forward.
Ooh, that's I want
to limb there, pal.
But
yeah.
Anyway, so July 17th, Davis has made his decision. Later in the day, he sends a telegram to Johnston ordering his removal and replacement by Hood. The first to hear about this of his subordinates, besides his immediate staff, is A.P. Stewart. And this is about where probably the most interesting part of this whole campaign to me really begins. A.P. Stewart, according to his account, first goes to William J. Hardee, because he wants to get together all the corps commanders to meet with Johnston in order to convince him to stay. Hardee, according to his account, was more interested in whether or not he got the command than the fact that Johnston was removed. Which seems a bit extreme to me, but I kind of get it. Hardee was not on good terms with Johnston, as has been implied by many historians and people at the time, like Bragg. So I imagine, and given his actions later on during the campaign, yeah, he had a bit of he definitely yearned for the seat.
I'm not sure I would argue that he's on bad terms with Johnson.
He's not on the best terms, to say the least.
He's well, after Johnson is replaced, first of all, he's irritated through the campaign that Johnson relies on Hood so much.
Indeed.
Hardee and Hood definitely don't get along well. There's a little known anecdote after New Hope Church, where the morning after New Hope Church cycle back in May, where Hood says, we better retreat. The Union artillery, they're going to plant 200 guns and overwhelm our line. And that doesn't happen, of course. And they spend the next week fighting along the New Hope Pickett's Mill line. And according to at least one account, for the next few mornings, Hardee would greet Hood with the comment, well, where are your 200 guns, Hood? So, so there's definite friction.
Yeah, we brought this up last time, yeah. Anyways, continuing, of course, Stewart goes to Hood. I should mention that this is from a letter in post-war years that Stewart writes to the campaign to clear his name, because Hood and Stewart were on pretty good terms as in the Army, all things considered. Partly because Hood was one of the guys who helped him get promoted, and also because Hood relied on him during the Tennessee campaigns as a senior subordinate. So there's probably some bias in Stewart's account, but I'm more willing to believe it. I do know that there's other accounts saying that Mansfield Lovell was the one organizing this, and there's there's other ones saying that Hood was the one that organized this. But anyways, Hood, Stewart, and Hardee, they all go to meet Johnston on the first day of Hood's command on July 18th, I believe, in the morning.
Yeah.
And they all collectively beg Johnston to stay, including Hood, who tries his best to bargain every chip that he can.
Well, they don't necessarily bargain. Yes, they appeal to Johnson, but they also appeal to President Davis.
They also send off messages to Davis requesting that Johnson remain in command at least for the current situation around Atlanta, which of course Davis refuses in a reply that arrives later. When that arrives, Hood requests that Johnston stay just to act as an advisor for him to help him through the next few battles. According to him, Johnston said sure to this, basically, but then left the city immediately after with his wife and went to Macon.
No. That's what Hood says.
Yeah, that's what Hood said.
That's not what happened.
Johnston. I know Johnson says otherwise.
Well, there's more contemporary evidence. William Mackle stayed for a week. Johnson stayed through the end of the 18th.
Yeah.
There's contemporary evidence, not post-war evidence, that Hood is just lying there.
Yeah, I guess in some regard yeah, but it is interesting to see that he was spending this time. The whole narrative against him that he was vying for the command of the army to take it from Johnston, and his first act in command of the army that he took from Johnston is to ask Johnston to stay. And I get the feeling, and this is something that's been pointed out to me a lot recently, is that Hood disagreed with how Johnston was handling the campaign, but he didn't want to have the seat to say it. He didn't want the position fostered on him. He wanted someone else in command, or at least for Johnston to get his act together and fix his strategy.
What do you think? Do you think he was what do you think is possible? He was angling for the command, and then suddenly when it's there, you're like, wait, I actually don't want this. I mean, what do you all think? I mean, was he actually trying to get command and then got cold feet, or was he never actually looking for command? He was just simply criticizing Johnston.
Well, it's easy to criticize, right?
Right.
I think that he wanted command. I don't necessarily think that he wanted command in the crisis that he inherited, because while the Confederates are spending July 17th, 18th trying to figure out what to do, well, they're all focused on internal matters. Sherman and the Federals they're moving east of Atlanta. They're undertaking active operation, and for the Confederates, it's a changing situation hour by hour, and so this is not the right time to change commanders.
Yeah,
and I think Hood feels that pressure as well.
Yeah, no, it's this is you inherit this at a crisis moment, and of course, like we said, a lot of people believe that crossing the Chattahoochee, and Thursday said the same thing, that this is the point. Maybe he believed the campaign is lost. Jefferson Davis adamantly says that's not what he thought, and I think that's the case. And of course, Davis is probably also thinking back to Richmond in 1862, when Johnston falls all the way back, and then Lee takes over and reverses the situation. So why not take a chance on Hood? And while we know that Hood as a corps commander, I would say, underperformed, Davis doesn't really know that. What he does know is all the things Hood had accomplished in the East and in Chickamauga as well. An amazing combat record. Now, he's not going to give the command to Hardee because Hardee had already turned him down. And, I mean, hell will have to freeze over 5 times before Beauregard gets anywhere near the Army of Tennessee.
Yeah. Well, and who's the point man orchestrating all this? Braxton Bragg.
Yeah.
Can we find a worse friend for Hardee than Braxton Bragg?
Bragg always said that he thought Hardee at least was a decent soldier, but pretty much not a good person. In the case of Beauregard,
I have to agree with him on that. Yeah. His actions in the next few months of the campaign were abysmal. to say the least.
Sorry. Now, in the case of Beauregard, Bragg was actually advocating for Beauregard in early 1864.
Yep.
Not for Army of Tennessee, but let's bring them north, defend Richmond. And by this time, Bragg has soured on Beauregard, and I would say in large part that's because as a subordinate, Bragg. I always thought it was interesting that Bragg, some of his subordinates hate him, but his superiors notoriously always liked him. And that's because if you ordered Bragg to jump off a building, he'd say, okay, what time? And I think that's what happens here is that him and Beauregard had a decent relationship, especially during the Shiloh campaign. They were very close. And I think he's essentially just following the lead of Davis. So there's no way he's going to advocate for Beauregard at all. Yeah. So from Davis's point of view, Hood looks like the man on the spot that you're going to jump to. Because Longstreet, you can't go with Longstreet. He's still recovering from a wound. Richard Taylor is still, I want to say, across the river at this point.
No, I think he's in Tennessee. I think he's in Alabama now, just without a command.
Just without a command? Okay. So he's finally away from Kirby Smith.
Yeah.
Now, just a quick aside. I know we talk about poisonous relationships in the Civil War, but I've voted for most poisonous is Kirby Smith and Richard Taylor. That is pure unadulterated hatred right there.
I mean, there's also Jeff C. Davis and Bull Nelson. That's a different with murder.
That's crime of passion. But I'd always say like Grant Rosecrans,
indicted but never convicted.
Yeah.
Oh boy. Yeah, we're gonna talk about Davis later, by the way.
Yeah, Grant Rosecrans and Davis, Beauregard, and then Kirby Smith, Richard Taylor. Those are the three that it's just so much venom being thrown around. I mean, men who honestly despise each other. I think the other one's a moron, But anyway, so Hood does. So you're thinking that Hood was angling for the command, but he's getting the command at the absolute worst time. And at that point, it's just overwhelming him.
I think Hood is incredibly frustrated with all the retreats. He's aggressive by nature. He wants to attack. He and Johnston can't ever seem to meet eye to eye. Even though Hardee says, Hood's been running the campaign so far. Clearly Hood doesn't think so. And so I think he's eager to replace Johnston.
All right. Okay, so everybody here is of the opinion that Johnston did not plan Peachtree Creek. But do y'all think that he was saying we are going to attack? He just hadn't formulated the plan yet.
He issued general orders to that effect. Yes, I think he was going to attack.
Yeah, I think so too. In which case, maybe we'll get a replay of Seven Pines, right?
Yeah. Who knows?
That
works so well for everyone involved.
Yeah, it's interesting. Because I remember you said last stream, Sean, that a lot of or maybe it was Dave, I can't recall, but one of you said that Johnston and Hood were working hand in glove for a while on planning. So a lot of the plans earlier were Hood oriented.
Yes.
So basically, this attack at Peachtree Creek, if Johnston had still been in command, most likely would have differed how?
Well, because Johnston never gave us any details, we don't know.
We don't know what his plan of attack was and where he was going to attack. It's probably
arguably we could say that Johnston intended to strike the Army of the Cumberland earlier as they were coming across Peachtree Creek, as opposed to after they've gotten across the creek. But that doesn't fit well with Johnston's previous pattern. Johnston is always slow. He kind of telegraphs every attack. Resaca at New Hope, you go through the various places where he does essay attacks. They're not speedy. They're not rapid.
Would you say that Johnston is better at offense or defense?
Oh, by far defense. Yeah.
Okay.
Defense. So I think he's too passive on defense, though. That's like the issue. I say a lot of the times oftentimes the best offense is a good best defense is a good offense.
He anticipates every one of Sherman's flanking moves, even Resaca. He does have plans in place for Resaca. I know that, but he absolutely beats Sherman to the punch for the move to Dallas. He withdraws to the Pine Mountain and Mud Creek lines. He withdraws to Kennesaw. He withdraws to Smyrna. He's a master at withdrawal. The South can't win the war with withdrawal. So,
there's that.
Though, as he pointed out, he is not a master at evacuations. I haven't read it, but there's apparently an entire book about how bad Johnston is at evacuating positions. I think it's called like Johnston, Breaker of the Iron Horse or something.
Destroyer of the Iron Horse. It's a really interesting little book.
Comically enough, Mark Summers did a review of that one. He was a fan of that one, and I didn't get to read it, but what I could see about it, I was like, that's a very interesting book because, But anyway, so what is the Union doing at this same time?
Resting and refitting for the coming operation, essentially.
All right. So where are they resting at? Well, they're divided at this point, aren't they? Most of Tennessee is.
There's
to the north.
There's a bridgehead. There's a bridgehead near Roswell, and they have a couple of crossings secured around Johnston's old position held by the Army of the Cumberland. Most of the army is on the north bank still. But
what date are you talking about?
Well, I'm trying to talk up till like July 17th when the movement starts. I may be wrong about the encampments. That's not something I'm always well-rounded on.
Well, while the Confederates are squabbling on the 18th, Sherman is moving and moving very rapidly.
Yeah, on the 17th, he moves out. He sends McPherson with Shawfield's corps in support towards around the Stone Mountain area initially to cut the Georgia Railroad connecting Atlanta to Augusta. Sherman does this because of the rumors from Grant that Early was going to withdraw and then take up rail and reinforce Johnston, because he still thought Johnston was in command until, I believe, late on the 18th. We'll get into that. So he wants McPherson to cut the rail line and tear off the railroad and make it unusable to the Confederates, which he'll succeed in doing. Meanwhile, Thomas makes an advance towards Peachtree Creek on the direct route to Atlanta, just to tie down, primarily to tie down the rebel troops around that area. Late on the 18th, I believe, or sometime then, Sherman gets news, I believe from a paper in Atlanta or some scouts, that Johnston has been replaced with Hood. Now, the accounts from around this time say that several officers like McPherson and Shawfield all reported to Sherman that about Hood's character, that it was very aggressive, very stupid, and would make dumb attacks. But I do not believe that if they did say this, that Sherman actually considered them, considering how he went about the next few operations, because he seems to disregard any potential for an attack from Hood, or at least because in many cases he's caught off guard, and the initial plans that he wanted to do we'll get to, but some of the dispositions he wanted his commanders to take up before they argued against them would have left his commands vulnerable to attack. So yeah, I do not believe that Sherman had a good grasp of Hood, at least in the first few weeks since he's taken command. Would you agree with that, Powell, or?
Well, Sherman's always overconfident. That's
yeah.
I mean, we can go right back to the beginning of the campaign, and or when we were talking about cavalry, Sherman's always ordering his cavalry to do extravagant, ridiculous things that don't usually come off. So there's a consistent degree of overconfidence there. Schofield is a classmate, and Schofield's memoirs and Sherman's memoirs both mention talking about the two getting together and Sherman quizzing Schofield about what's Hood like, and Schofield says he's going to attack. that's who he is.
Schofield was right. Yeah, for once he's right about something.
But
I hate to say it.
I think that up to July 20, nothing Sherman is doing is remarkably overconfident. They're careful maneuvers. He's deployed well. He's destroyed the Georgia Railroad, and even arguably they crossed they crossed Peachtree Creek very effectively. Maybe not so much Joseph Hooker, but certainly the 4th and 14th Corps cross. But the army's under Thomas. That's the Army of the Cumberland. They're, Thomas never leaves himself open to a punch.
Indeed. Let's get to Peachtree Creek then. So Thomas's command crosses on the 19th. There's a small action near, I believe, Howell's Ferry. Howell's Mill. But that's like a small brigade attacking a few Union regiments that have crossed.
Yeah.
It's very small. And so besides that, there's no really opposition beyond skirmishers opposing the crossing. Some argue, like many authors argue, that Hood should have attacked on the 19th against these troops crossing. I'd say he still had like a great chance on the 20th, as evidenced by Stewart's performance, but we'll get to that. Anyways, by this point, Hood has conceived his plan of attack. He will attack Thomas's army there at Peachtree Creek. He leaves Wheeler's corps to screen his right wing east of Atlanta. On his right flank, Cheatham is to remain to assist in covering that flank as well. Cheatham is now commanding Hood's old corps because the senior division commander, Stevenson, wasn't well liked by Hood because he was very subpar as a division commander, to say the least. And so Cheatham is the least. Yeah, and so Cheatham, the senior division commander in the army, and I believe the senior division commander in the entire Confederate army by this point, is
he's been commanding the division since Shiloh.
Yeah,
yeah,
and he's had an effective record this far in the war, especially at Perryville. But this decision leaves his old division there, George Maney, who's not good. I'm just going to say it. He isn't good. He isn't up to task for the command.
I'm not sure. I'm not sure that's all that fair. He's brand new to the job. He's a good brigade commander.
There's that.
There are, when we talk about July 22nd, we can, the 20th and 22nd, we can.
We'll get to that. I'll just continue. Anyways, the plan is for Hardee's corps on the right and Stewart's corps on the left to strike Thomas's army, particularly the left flank of the line held by a division of 4th Corps under John Newton and 20th Corps under Hooker. This is set. The initial attack plan was to start at 1 p.m. However, Cheatham on the right flank is spooked because he doesn't believe his flank is extending far enough. And so Hood authorized a shift to the right. And this kind of ruins the positioning of the army. I believe there's that there are some gaps in the line with Stewart's corps. I believe I get into the details, but I don't think we have time. The attack does not go off until 4 p.m. By this time, Newton's division has successfully dug in. Hooker's corps is still somewhat camped, not really in position, not entrenched. Hardee's entire corps, sans Cleaver's division in reserve, is poised to strike Newton's single division. They're outnumbered about 5-1. But here's the issue. Hardee really didn't seem to give a shit. He didn't really plan the attack, didn't recon the ground, and neither did any of his subordinates, really, try to take up the task.
Well, to be fair, the ground that they reconned was a mile further west.
Indeed, yeah, there's that case.
They shifted a mile to a mile and a half to the east, and so when they were going into the attack, both Hardee's and A.P. Stewart's corps were attacking over completely unfamiliar ground.
Yeah. That said, even despite that, he had a clear numerical advantage and should have overwhelmed Newton. Yes, Newton was behind entrenchment and had artillery support, but 5-1 at odds, they should have done better than they did. The attack is abysmally led. Base division is on the far right and attacked into nothing and does not and isn't really engaged at all. Walker's division advances in a very hodgepodge manner. Only Stevens' brigade is heavily engaged, and Brigadier Stevens is mortally wounded in the charge. The other two brigades kind of wander off and get shot in the flanks, forced back. Maney's division, they push up, but they halt and just trade shots with the enemy line.
Well, Hardee halts them.
Oh.
Hardee,
I thought it was Maney that...
No, Hardee halts them.
Yeah.
Hardee says later that he halted them and then tried to bring up Claiborne's division, and he was going to launch. He was going to use bait on the flank, and then Claiborne and Maney frontally.
Yeah.
But there's an order that comes from Hood.
Yeah, sending Cleburne down to Bald Hill to take up the flank there. Because he's finally gotten news from Wheeler about McPherson's approach, because by this point McPherson had taken Decatur and was pushing on the eastern defenses of Atlanta. And so Hood wanted to send another division down to hold the line, looking over the railroad. And so he sends Cleburne, who is his only reserve. Well, this is like 8 p.m. in the battle. At the start of the assault, I want to move over to Stewart's front. Stewart is attacking quite under strength. He has only 4 brigades taking part in the attack, plus French's division in support on the far left flank. But the difference between Stewart and Hardee is, well, there's 2. One, while 20th Corps outnumbers Stewart probably 3-1 at this campaign, Hooker's corps is out of position. They're not entrenched, and they're kind of not really expecting an attack. At least part of them aren't. And second, Stewart actually does due diligence and reconnoiters the ground and informs his subordinates of their jobs. And so his corps attacks. Featherston's brigade is cut to ribbons, attacking. Scott's brigade manages to overwhelm the 33rd New Jersey in front of Geary's division and uses a defile to break through their line and briefly routes part of Geary's division, but they soon reform and counterattack. Walthal's 2 brigades attack Williams' division, supported by part of 14th Corps, with some heavy firefighting going on. Hardee lost around 800 men attacking Newton's division, who lost only 100. And Hooker lost around 2,000 men, while Stewart lost... Hold on, I need to pull this up. Stewart lost 1,500.
Yeah, it's one of the few instances where the attacker inflicts more losses on the defender.
Yeah, it's definitely the nadir of Hooker's command during the campaign, I'd say. yeah, he was quite lazy in his deployment. On the Union side, back at 1 p.m., the rest of the commanders were waiting for Hooker to move forward to, set up their lines and entrench, but Hooker just spent like the afternoon just relaxing and eating lunch. So by like 4 p.m. only 14th Corps and Newton's Division were actually in position and entrenched.
Well,
yeah. I'll leave
what's your take on Peachtree Creek, Dave?
Well, Hooker doesn't expect an attack. I think they expected an attack in the morning. Hooker is slow crossing the creek, and they're slow coming up, and he decides, or his troops largely decide not to do much by way of entrenchment. And I think it's because by 1 o'clock, they're not going to hit us. The military reaction, but in that sense, the delay in left actually helped the Confederates. By and large, it didn't work in the Confederates' favor, but our line is intact, and by the morning of the 21st, they're entrenched. So it's certainly carelessness, but it's not. It's not going to be decisive, I guess, is the best way to put it.
Yeah. One thing that struck me about this battle, number of men engaged, how light the losses are for the number engaged.
Yeah. I'd say it's because Stuart's the only corps that's like significant on the Confederate side, and that's only 4 brigades. That said, of course, one of those brigades, Featherston, loses over 600 out of 1,200 men that go into action. The 20th Corps.
Resting from a tactical point of view, that virtually none of the Confederate reserve brigades, in Hardee's case, the reserve division, Claiborne's, got involved at all.
Yeah, that was...
the Confederates are unable, and this goes for Stuart as well as Hardee, they're unable to exploit limited tactical successes by feeding in reserves. Well, I think that goes to the newness of so many of the commanders on the field.
Yeah. Well, the problem with that was that 2 brigades have been left like far to the rear. John Adams and Quarles' brigade, I believe they were left on the far left of the rebel line, still on the Chattahoochee, in Stuart's old position, just to cover there. I may be wrong, and I'm just thinking about the skirmishers left there from the divisions, but yeah, they were nowhere to support the attack, which of course depreciated the amount of men put into the fight.
Yeah, well, you've created a long line, but not a deep line.
Yeah, and you're planning to attack with that.
And the only the only real reserve was Hardee's with Claiborne's division, and whether or not Claiborne or Hardee was quick off the block or slow off the block, end of the day, he had a ready-made excuse because Hood says, "Give me that division," right at the end of the fight.
Yeah. Well, you say that, and he has 2 relatively uncommitted divisions already, Bates on the right.
Woods in a swamp. Bates is not that Bate does very well in 2 or 3 different places in the Atlanta campaign, but
we'll get to one of those later on.
But he's floundering into very bad terrain, and it takes him several hours to reorient. When Hardee finally gets hold of him via courier and they reorient to turn Newton's flank, that's like almost 6 o'clock. That's when the orders come to shift and cancel the attack. So
yeah,
it's also worth noting that Bates' division is also, I believe, the smallest one
It certainly is. About 2,500 officers and men by this point.
Yeah, that's like a brigade at Shiloh.
Yeah. Yeah, I believe the Orphan Brigade at this time had around 700 to 800 men left out of like 1,300 they started out the campaign with. They'd lost heavily at Dallas, of course, but yeah, continuing. This battle is the first what I call the July battles, and that's like the three big battles that occur.
Now we're going to get into. Well, of course, at the same time, Sherman is going to Decatur, and the Georgia Railroad had already been hit by some of Sherman's cavalry, and now is marching towards Atlanta. So I know they always say the Battle of Atlanta or Bald Hill is a one-day battle, but it's actually more of a two-day one because July 21st, Cleburne has to stop them.
Yeah, I'll get on that. So Cleburne's men are sent south and set up on the line during the night, taking over from part of Wheeler's corps. I believe part of his division held part of Bald Hill, while part of Wheeler's command held part of it. There's a lot of confusion over the position there, but to say the least, in the morning, Cleburne's division is in a poor spot. Especially his right flank under James Argyle Smith, the Texans. They are in a dip, and so Union artillery on hills opposite them are able to plunge fire into their ranks. I believe Smith claims one company of the 18th Texas was completely wiped out, 18 men by a single shell.
Just remember to keep pace, though, for this talk. We can't get too precise, okay?
All right, good to know. Anyway, so McPherson plans to attack with 17th Corps under Francis Blair. 17th Corps had arrived partway through the campaign back on June 8th. They hadn't seen major combat, some skirmishing during the Kennesaw operations, but this is their first real fight since joining the Army. Leading the charge is Mortimer Leggett's division. In particular, the 1st Brigade under Manning Force, who has one of the best names of the entire war. Let's just say it. Manning Force has about 1,800 men, and he decides to charge around Bald Hill. His men manage to rout Wheeler's cavalry from the southern end of the hill and take possession of the height. Part of Cleburne's division tries to counterattack, but is only able to briefly hold part of the hill before falling back to better positions in the rear. It's a hard, sharp fight. Another division of the Corps under Giles A. Smith attacks on the main front, but they of course get repulsed because they're hitting straight on rebel infantry of Cleburne's division, of course. So some of the best shots in the army. Total Union casualties this day, I believe, is 800. Confederate casualties amount to about 300 in Cleburne's division, plus a couple hundred in Wheeler's corps. So a sharp, bloody battle that gets overlooked. Union take control of Bald Hill, which later becomes known as Leggett Hill. The Leggett wants to call it Forces Hill because he was the one that fought for it. Anyway, during the night, Hood makes a new plan. He wants to emulate Jackson's night march, late march on Chancellorsville. And he wants to send Hardee's corps to flank and strike for Decatur, then march into the Union rear and hit them from behind. Hardee disagrees and thinks this march is too ridiculous to endeavor for an army in one day. Because keep in mind, the roads here are terrible. And also the distances are far too much to cover. Far longer distance than Jackson covered during his march at Chancellorsville. And so instead, Hardee plans on just striking from the southern flank of the Union line, which at this point is undefended. McPherson, on the 22nd, goes to Sherman and says, "Hey, I need to put the 16th Corps on my southern flank to defend there, because I think Hood's going to attack me there. Sherman disagrees and wants 16th Corps to stay in the rear and tear up railroads tracks. This is one of those moments I was talking about where Sherman just disregarded any possibility that Hood was going to attack, or at least that he would attack, or at least this was him throwing caution to the wind. Luckily for the Union, Sherman's willing to listen to his subordinate, and so 16th Corps is deployed on the left flank around Sugar Creek. But there is a gap in the line between the 16th Corps and the 17th. And so when Hardee attacks around noon, the attacks on 16th Corps line by Walker and Bates' division are repulsed. But Cleburne's division managed to exploit the gap between the 17th Corps and the 16th Corps and marches into the rear. McPherson's riding on the back road in the middle of this gap, looking for positions to place a reserve brigade to fill the gap, when he's come across by men of the 5th Confederate Regiment, which formerly the 2nd Tennessee Irish.
Dude, seriously, we can't get this much detail, man.
Anyway, sorry. Yeah, I just wanted to bring that up because they're a regiment that fought at Shiloh. I think you probably would have recognized. Anyway, so.
Oh yeah,
he comes across. I know him. All right, he comes across the Confederate skirmish line. He's called to surrender, but instead he tips his hat and turns and tries to run. This was a mistake because he's soon shot and killed. I believe this is the only time that a Union Army commander was a full rank Army commander was killed in battle, because there were Corps commanders, seniors, but war. Yeah, Nathaniel Lyon's the only other example, but.
No. I meant like for an army of this scale. The only one is Albert Sidney Johnston. Only 2 army commanders in the entire
that as well.
Die.
Yeah. Yeah, and also I'd say William E. Jones at Piedmont, but that's a smaller battle. Anyways.
No, those are small forces. Those are like divisions. Like same thing with Lyon. But anyway, so McPherson's killed.
Yeah, and so Logan takes command. John Blackjack Logan. So he rides south to 16th Corps line to make sure things are stable there. But for the most part, 17th and 16th Corps managed to fight off Cleburne and later Maney's division. I will say Hardee's handling of the front is poor. I say his biggest mistake was constantly redeploying Maney's division, because Maney started off on the far right flank of the line, and then he's ordered to the right rear of Cleburne's division. But then Hardee changes his mind again, and as Cleburne is attacking, Maney's division moves to the left rear to take up the left flank of the army. In doing so, they go through the reserve brigade of Cleburne's division, Brigadier Lowry, which fucks up Cleburne's attack royally, because one brigade goes into the gap utterly unsupported. That's James Smith's brigade. Smith, leading Texas, the Texans, is wounded. Command falls upon a lieutenant colonel. They're eventually routed, and 2 regiments are captured almost whole. Meanwhile, go.
It's also probably useful to acknowledge that the 16th Corps is able to pull troops off of their front line, which is facing east towards or west towards Atlanta, to deal with these incursions in their rear.
Oh yeah, 15th Corps, yeah.
Which is 16th and 15th Corps, which is going to set up some interesting possibilities for the Confederates, but coordination is going to be the issue.
Yeah. Parts of the 15th Corps are sent to deal with the breakthrough down there. There is heavy fighting around Bald Hill, of course. Lowry's brigade makes a series of charges on the heights from the same flank that Forsyth attacked through the day before, but is repulsed with heavy losses. The Union troops are known to jump between the trench lines, from each side of the breastworks, because they had been formed on a lot of old Confederate works that they had repositioned the night before, and so they just hopped over whenever the other flank was under threat. Yeah, sadly, coordination was really bad between the Confederates, and they never coordinated attack on all sides at once. There were points where, not at the same time, that the Union troops on Bald Hill were assailed from the north, the south, the east, and the west. Not at the same time, but there were plenty of opportunities for the Confederates to just surround and destroy the force here. But the 17th Corps fought tenaciously to hold their ground. But because of the weakening of the 15th Corps' line to the west, facing Atlanta, when Cheatham's Corps finally goes in, Brown, leading Hindman's old division, manages a breakthrough along the railroad cuts and overwhelms a division under Morgan L. Smith. 15th Corps' line is broken. Only Charles Wood's 1st Division to the north holds its line, along with Charles Walcutt's brigade to the south. The Confederates don't follow up this advance any further. They reinforce the breakthrough with more troops from Clayton's division, but they don't follow up the advance. I believe it was just lack of command and control on the part of Cheatham, who is barely present at all on the field of battle. So eventually Logan's able to gather together his corps plus reinforcements from 16th Corps to counterattack and retake the old line. There's one final charge late that night, led by the last few reserves of Hardee's Corps on Bald Hill. By this point, the hill's a veritable fortress. During the downtime, the Union troops were able to just build up and up the line. And so when they attacked, it was just a bloody repulse. Despite apparently Cleveland was leading the charge of Francis Walker's brigade, or at least Sam Walker claims that he did. But this wasn't enough. So the battle comes to a close. The Confederates lost between 5,000 and 6,000 men, and the Union lost about 3,700. And this was probably the largest and bloodiest full battle of the entire campaign. It definitely was the largest and bloodiest. And I'd argue this is, as Gary Eckelberger calls it, the day Dixie died. This was the last real chance Hood had to really win the campaign, or at least turn the tide. Probably should get into that later, but...
Well...
Any comments, I guess?
No, that's a fairly good summary.
Oh, thank you.
Gentlemen, I'm gonna have to bail out here.
Oh.
I'm pushing 10 o'clock my time, and I have a bunch of things to accomplish in the morning, including some travel. So
I got one question for you before you go, though.
Sure.
Two quick ones. One, for Ezra Church, do you agree? Do you agree with the view that was there for a long time that it's not a battle Hood wanted, or the view put forward by in Slaughter at the Chapel that by the nature of Hood's orders it was a battle that was going to happen to secure the road, like Skillet Road? So which one do you agree with at this point?
Well, I think S.D. Lee rushed into battle.
Mm-hmm.
I think Hood wanted to make yet another flank attack.
Yeah.
By using the Lick Skillet Road and deploying a corps along the road. He didn't get there. So I guess I'm going to split the difference.
Gotcha.
I don't think S.D. Lee violated Hood's intent. I do think he screwed it up tactically.
Yeah.
And the other one, quick. Oh, and there actually is one super chat.
There's a super chat.
There's a super chat that addresses.
But wait. But I have another one. This is a very quick question. Is anybody working on a book just on Jonesboro? Because they have two for Peachtree Creek, two for Ezra Church, one for Atlanta. So you're writing the book on Jonesboro, huh?
Well, I'm going to eventually.
I know at least 2 people who've talked about Jonesboro.
I think Hess is going to write one, reading his most recent book. At least that's the implication I get from some comments he has about like it being, the deciding battle and not instead of July 22nd. But
Gary Elkelberger has talked about a Jonesboro book, but not in a long time. And Scott Patchen, who's pretty good friends with Gary, and they do a lot of Atlantic campaign stuff together. Scott has been talking about a Jonesboro book for a long time.
Interesting. He usually does. He's usually Shenandoah Valley.
Okay. Yeah. I love his Shenandoah Valley books. They're some of the best out there.
Yeah.
So here's our. Oh, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say. So if they'll ever write them, I don't know. But
right.
So people talking about them.
More books they want to write than they get to write. But the super chat for Dave this evening comes to us from Tasmanian Walrus for $5. Thank you, Walrus. And he asked for Dave, how do you evaluate Howard's performance in the campaign, both as a Corps and Army commander? How did he handle the 4th Corps and command of Army of the Tennessee?
As a Corps commander, he's very cautious. The campaign begins literally with the specter of Chancellorsville hanging over his head a year before. He does well at Resaca, doesn't do so well at Pickett's Mill. But by and large, the reason he gets Army command is because he doesn't rock the boat and doesn't take big risks. He's not flashy, and Sherman likes that. I mean, he's also a West Pointer. So he gets, he gets the Army of Tennessee over Logan. It's interesting that Sherman is viewed as this sort of aggressive commander. But whenever Sherman gets to promote somebody, it's always he looks for the most conservative, most careful guy he can find.
Howard, considering Howard's political views.
Yeah, Howard and Slocum are both good examples of falling back on the picking the West Pointer and not rocking the boat. Logan probably should have had that army from the very beginning. I think the campaign would be considerably different if Logan were running the Army of the Tennessee. And Hooker, who's easily the most aggressive and arguably for most of May and June, the most effective Corps commander of the 6, ultimately 7 Corps involved. Sherman is delighted to see him go, even though it's Hooker's 20th Corps that's doing most of the fighting and most of the hard hitting. So Howard is the safe choice in both Corps and Army command. Howard's an admirable human being. He's not such a great soldier.
Well, thank you, Dave, for coming out tonight and helping us try to make sense of this campaign that seems to
very
kind of go back and forth. Yeah, I mean, it's definitely not linear in its geographical progression.
Definitely not.
No.
All right.
Anyway.
Well, good night, guys.
All right, good night.
Right. Yeah. Later, Dave. So, we're gonna have to on my end. You got to pick up the pace too, man. Like
I'm just gonna say this. I think we should actually end it here and do a part 3 because I think there's too much to go on about like the campaign after this because there's Ezra Church and then there's the Stoneman McCook raid. Then there's Ujoy Creek, the Lovejoy raid, and then Jonesboro. And I don't want to skim over those. Those are some fascinating actions to me, and I'd rather not like.
Well, here's the thing, though. Regardless of that, I'm just being honest, man. when you're going like this brigade here, this brigade there, these people don't have maps in front of them.
I know. I'm just
So I'm also going like I'm glazing over.
Yeah, I have to agree with Sean.
My apologies.
I mean, because I feel like I know the Civil War reasonably well for somebody who is not an expert, but when you get below the core level, it becomes a little confusing.
Yeah.
Right, if you want to mention like an interesting incident, sure thing, but yeah, it's like it's so. Let me go ahead and do Ezra Church. Okay, well, we'll do the command changes with the Army of the Tennessee and do Ezra Church, and then see about doing a part 3 at some time then, because you're right about not wanting to gloss them over, especially the cavalry actions, but we just can't do in that kind of detail, man.
Yeah, I'd actually argue that this is like the perfect place to like end it, because I'd say this is kind of the climax of the campaign, and after this is like the beginning of the siege operations.
No, we're gonna do Ezra Church. I just read.
All right, we'll do Ezra Church. We'll do Ezra Church. All right, Well,
you're gonna have 2 of your most interesting command things that occur right now, right? We have the Army of the Tennessee, which Dave was talking about, the change in command there. And like Dave said, Sherman tends to pick cautious guys. He likes West Pointers. Howard was also, like he said, Howard's a decent guy. He was brave, so he was very good at winning people over to him, unless your name's Joseph Hooker. So Howard gets the command over Logan. Sherman, of course, cited that Logan maybe didn't have the administrative chops for it, which that's highly unlikely. Wait a second, did this thing go out?
No, Dave Powell just left.
I'm there. Okay, that's what it was.
Yeah. Powell just was.
To make sure, because I did go out briefly about maybe 15 minutes ago. But anyway, so all right, so Joseph Hooker, and like Dave said, Joseph Hooker has done excellent throughout the campaign. He actually has experience in Army command. Stephen Sears has really won me over to the idea that Joseph Hooker might be the most unlucky man in the Civil War, simply because of what happens to him at Chancellorsville with getting wounded. But that being said, the problem with Hooker is always that people just don't like him. I mean, not everybody. He's got fans, but a lot of officers do not like him for a variety of reasons. They see him as morally dubious. He is arrogant. He can be rather blunt. He also was not a political radical, but he sided with the radicals. And it wasn't out of conviction. It's purely a calculation. So somebody like Howard, even if they don't agree with this position, they know that Howard really means it. Whereas for Hooker, it's just not really the case necessarily. So, putting Howard in command of the Army of the Tennessee over Hooker, I can understand why Hooker's angry, considering everything, And you have to put Howard over him. I mean, that's the guy he blames for Chancellorsville.
Yeah, rightly so.
Yeah, exactly. And of course, I mean, you also had Frank Blair, but I mean, Logan had more experience. He was higher in rank. He was a better commander overall. Nothing against Blair. Blair was a decent corps commander.
Yeah.
There's also, of course, Grenville Dodge, which this leads to my favorite one, is the Thomas Sweeney Grenville Dodge fistfight.
Oh yeah, which is absolutely hilarious when you realize that Tom Sweeney only has one arm.
Yeah. Well, Sweeney, I mean, Sweeney was also a very controversial commander in many ways. Also, just very personally aggressive. He made a lot of enemies out of fellow officers. He also was a Fenian, and he saw the Civil War as a way for Irish troops to get combat experience to then attack Canada, which Sweeney was part of an attack on Canada after the war.
Yeah, he was leader of the Fenian raids. Yeah,
I read an account. I read an account of Sweeney at Shiloh where he only has one arm. He lost an arm in Mexico, and he ran around the battlefield with his reins in his mouth and one sword held up with the other one. And the other thing to note about Sweeney as well is that, very, like I said, very cantankerous and difficult. And with the Fenian raids, what was the other thing I'm going to say about Sweeney? Oh, that's another one thing too. This guy, whenever he gets wounded, it's always horrible. He got hit with an arrow in the neck after the Mexican War. Yeah. No, every time Sweeney gets wounded, it's always like horrible. I mean, this man's body is broken by war,
Yeah.
And he just keeps coming back, which is why I got the nickname Fighting Tom. But anyway, Sweeney, of course, he did very well at Shiloh, although there's some controversy about that because one of his regiments pulled out, and that was one of the reasons why the Hornets' Nest fell. But that being said, I'd say overall he did very well at Shiloh. That one could. That one probably had more to do with the chaos of the battlefield and also command and control confusion. It's probably what led to that more than anything else. Yeah. And, of course, he did well at Corinth. But anyway, Sweeney hates both Grenville Dodge and Fuller. Fuller's an Englishman. So immediately Sweeney hates this guy. And Dodge... Dodge to me is a pretty shady character. You know? Yeah, he doesn't really actually have much combat experience. He owes his position due to his friendship with Grant, and he also had good relations with Lincoln. He was important in the Transcontinental Railroad, but Dodge was involved in some corrupt things before and after the Civil War. And the troops under his command that he had in northern Mississippi in 1863, they were known in particular for like looting and burning indiscriminately sometimes. You know, so I think Sweeney also was looking at Dodge and being like, "This guy's an idiot. I belong here, not this guy. I should be in charge of 16th Corps." And Sweeney's probably right. So they got into a fist fight, and when Dodge rode off, Sweeney chased him down, yelling he was a coward and he'd come back and fight him. And so Sweeney got removed from command, and while he was acquitted, he never again held another command. Yeah. You know. And so so Sherman's lost one of his best division commanders, but no more. But he can still keep things.
A problematic one, though. I will say that Dodge actually did pretty well during the Atlanta campaign. It's at Bald Hill on July 22nd. He basically holds the line against 2 rebel divisions with only 3 brigades on hand. Then again, both divisions are led by subpar commanders, and one of them gets killed before the attack begins. That's General Walker.
Oh, I don't think Dodge is incompetent. I'm just saying that he's like Schofield. He's an example of this guy really didn't do much. His position, he has this position he currently has, not because of competence or anything he's done, but because of who his friends are.
Yeah, I've also read that apparently during the Vicksburg campaign, Dodge was serving as basically Grant's chief of intelligence, and was apparently like this super genius when it came to it, and was apparently able to gather intel from Joe Johnston's mail, his personal mail or some shit. You have some insight on that?
Yes. I actually have a book on it, but I haven't read it yet. But yes, Dodge did oversee intelligence gathering and was good at that. But I guess some of my negative opinion of Dodge also comes from he was supposed to support Strait's raid in 1863, and he just did a piss poor job of helping Strait out, very bad. That being said, I'm not saying the guy's incompetent. I'm just saying that he finds himself in command of 16th Corps, and Sweeney's probably thinking to himself, "Wait, I fought at Shiloh and Corinth. I excelled both times. I'm one of the most experienced fighters we have in the Army. Why are you in charge?
Yeah.
You're mostly known for what? Burning down a women's college in Alabama? Hooray. What an accomplishment, Dodge. What an accomplishment." Yeah. I take Sweeney's side in the fight. But that's partially because I just don't like Dodge. But yeah, no, Dodge did pretty well at Atlanta, at holding the line there. But of course, like you said, a lot of this do with terrain, Walker getting killed, they attack by bait and all the rest. But anyway, Sherman is now going to start shifting the army. And keep this in mind, he has Howard replace Logan as temporary commander in the midst of the movement towards the mist movement that is going east and down towards Utoy. And the objective of this one is to cut the rail line to Atlanta. And the only one really that's still working is the Macon line. The Atlanta and West Point Railroad is inoperable because of Lovell Rousseau.
Oh yeah,
yeah.
I'll let you go off about Rousseau's raid.
Just in brief, I don't know too many details, but just in brief about this, Lovell Rousseau led a raid into Alabama. It's not really commented on too much. And this raid was very successful and destroyed a lot of railroad track and knocked this railroad out. I mentioned that one because, I was reading one of Steve Davis's books, and he's like, well, cavalry just really wasn't very effective at this. And then the next paragraph he goes, Rousseau, though, destroyed all this track. And I'm like, doesn't this disprove your argument?
Yeah. I will say I recommend reading Dave Evans' book on Sherman's Horsemen, because he has 2 chapters, well, actually 3 or 4 of them on the raid alone and the preparations and all that.
Yeah. The one thing I want to note about Rousseau is that Rousseau is an example of a political hit job, because Rousseau is a brigade commander at Shiloh, did very well. One of the best brigade performances in Buell's army for sure, and eventually became a division commander. And I mean, he was a very good soldier. But Rousseau is a Kentuckian, and the Army of the Ohio had a lot of Kentuckians in the higher command because it was a way to placate Kentucky. But these guys tend to be conservative Unionists, such as Rousseau. So as the radicals gain more of an advantage in the Lincoln administration, people who are going to be more conservative Unionists find themselves pushed to the side or disgusted. And also Rousseau's a Democrat, serving a Republican administration. So you got to make so eventually Rousseau, by his association with Rosecrans, by his opposition to abolitionism, and by simply the fact of being a Democrat, finds himself sidelined, even though he had done very well in every battle he was in.
Yeah.
So I think it's kind of fun that Rousseau leads one of the most successful cavalry raids of the whole thing. Like, Rousseau should be the one there, not George Stoneman.
Yeah, not Washington and Elliott, not Kilpatrick. Rousseau definitely deserved it. Also, you deserve 14th Corps instead of Palmer, but for some reason they go with Palmer, even though he does not want to be there anymore.
Yeah, Palmer's an interesting guy because whenever I've read his stuff, he is very, very cantankerous.
Yeah, we'll get to him at U-23 next stream.
Yeah, I'm shocked he stayed in command as long as he did. By the way, fun thing about Palmer, he is literally one of the only commanders in the Army of the Cumberland who did not like Rosecrans. And when I say didn't like him, he didn't hate him. He just said, I kind of find him a bit pompous and annoying, but he is talented. I'm like, so one thing that's really struck me when I did research in the Army of the Cumberland was just how universally liked Rosecrans is by almost everybody under him. It was very hard to find a letter by a soldier or any of his officers being overly critical or disliking him. Palmer was the closest I came to it, and Palmer was more like ambivalent, But anyways, so what at the same time happens, Sherman's making this movement, and Hood decides that he is going to try to do what he had tried to accomplish at Bald Hill, make a flank attack. To do that, he needs to secure the Lick Skillet Road. Now, to do this, he's not going to rely on Hardee. Hardee's men are taking heavy losses, but also Hood and Hardee really hate each other now. I mean, it's gone from a tense relationship to open hostility. And he's going to pick Stuart to be the flanking force. And Stuart, at this being the man he trusts. But his own corps is not led by Cheatham. Instead, he requested Stephen D. Lee, which at first sounds like an odd choice, doesn't it?
Yeah, I should clarify, that was his third choice. His first choice was Mansfield Lovell, and his second was, of all people, Wade Hampton.
That's right. Yeah, no, he did request Wade Hampton.
Yeah, though, of course, those get rejected, and so he's left with S.D. Lee, which, doesn't scream, oh, yes, Lee's going to be a Hood guy all the way through.
Well, they knew each other and were friends. So it's a way for him to shore up his support in the Army. Stephen D. Lee, in brief, Stephen D. Lee, one guy, somebody once called him the Forrest Gump of the Civil War. He just seems to show up everywhere. He was on Beauregard's staff for at Fort Sumter and was on hand for that. He eventually commanded artillery under Robert E. Lee at 2nd Bull Run and Antietam, did very well there. So he was sent to Vicksburg, and he played a leading role in the Confederate victory at Chickasaw Bayou. And so Lee is a young, up-and-coming officer. Everybody speaks very highly of him. He was very optimistic. I don't want to say charismatic necessarily, but like just charming. He just was good at winning people over to him, just making people like him, you know. The problem is that he then was thrust into department command, and right before this happens, the Union gets some good news from northern Mississippi. Andrew Jackson Smith leads a foray against Nathan Bedford Forrest. This foray manages to do damage to the Confederate infrastructure, but more importantly, he wins a battle at Tupelo. And Tupelo is a stinging defeat. It's one of Forrest's worst showings. Now, a lot of people, including Forrest, blamed Lee for it. What it really does show you, though, is that if you leave Forrest on his own, he's very effective. The moment he has to serve under somebody, he's not very good. Because Forrest is the kind of guy who sees himself as the best in the room. And to be fair, in terms of fighting power, usually is. But that doesn't always mean you can work with people. And that's the case there. I haven't read about Tupelo in a long time, but from what I remembered reading about it, it really is the fault of both Lee and Forrest. They both made major mistakes that led to a pretty bloody defeat. I mean, Forrest's men get mauled.
But
anyway, so
they lose like 1,300 men there, which is insane for a cavalry attack.
Exactly. And it's also worth noting that, so Lee is coming to this army under a cloud, essentially, with a cloud over his head, and he's very young. And, I think this I don't know how, this had to have had people scratching their heads in the army, right? I mean, why aren't you sticking with Cheatham? Why not give Claiborne a try? Right? I mean, you've got options in the army. I want to say Patton Anderson is there. No, Patton Anderson is not there yet.
No, he's not here yet. Brown's still commanding that division.
Yeah. Now Clayton doesn't have as much experience. Stevenson just sucks.
Yeah. The problem is Stevenson is senior, and the only two people senior to him are Loring and Cheatham.
Yeah, and I mentioned Claiborne. I mean, it's really not a bad idea, is it? But anyways,
yeah.
But or at least like try somebody, right? In the case of Loring, Loring's very much a hit and miss commander for the most part, but he is very difficult to work with many times. He can be very difficult to work with, so understandable. But anyway, so he goes with Lee, and understand when this battle happens, Lee has been in command of his corps for a day. That's it. Just one day. And so what happened is Lee was ordered to secure the road. By the time he gets there, the leading elements of the Army of the Tennessee, they're not on the road directly, but they're on the heights that overlook the road. Now, I asked Dave about this because Earl J. Hess says that they didn't have to fight there, that Stuart's corps could have just marched on by. I think Hess is wrong on this one.
Yeah, agreed.
I think those heights. And this is kind of a rare misstep because usually Hess excels at tactical analysis, But I think just off on this one. No, you can't hit everything, right? So anyway, Lee, when he sees Howard there, starts attacking. The attacks are piecemeal insofar as it's not the divisions are fed in one at a time. Now, I think the reasons for this is because when they get there, the Union forces are not entrenched, and they have no artillery. So I think Lee just thought, if I just bum rush these guys, I can knock them off now. Like, just hit now before they entrench, before they pull up their guns. And there is actually one point in the battle where the Union right flank almost gives way. But that doesn't happen. They're able to hold. Several brigades are mauled. In particular, most famously, the Louisiana Brigade, which the colors of the 30th Louisiana were captured. And that capture was featured prominently on the cover of Harper's Weekly. And the 30th Louisiana, interesting regiment. They had a very unusual flag as well, a very big one. They have it down here at the museum in New Orleans. But anyway, so these attacks fail. Then Stuart arrives with his division. He makes one attack, and then Stuart is wounded. Battle ends. Now, this entire time, Hood does not go to the front to check on things. In fact, Hood's not even exactly sure what's happening. an acoustic shadow made it to where he couldn't really hear what the battle going on. And to be fair, there's the Confederates did bring up some batteries, but it's not a very loud battle as far as artillery goes because the Union doesn't have any. And Hood was also focused on Sherman, who was at the time testing Hardee's lines and Hardee's holding the Atlanta entrenchments. So, Hood, I think where Hood erred was he didn't designate an overall commander for the movement. Lee and Stuart conferred, but no overall commander had been set up. So I think that was one mistake Hood made. Lee and Stuart also didn't really keep Hood too well informed, but at the same time, Hood himself failed to try to figure out what was going on. So this is just a mishmash of a battle and leads to horrendous losses. Now, the Union lost 600 men. The Confederates lost over 3,000. For over 100 years, people believed that the Confederates actually lost 5,000 men to the Union's 600.
Oh yeah, I've seen stuff like that for Petrie Creek, where they say, the Union lost 2,000 men while the Confederates lost 10,000 or something ridiculous like that.
Yeah,
I saw that in Bruce Stewart's book on Cleburne, the most recent biography, and he makes a claim that the Confederates lost 5,000 men, and I'm just scratching my damn head.
Another one like that is Atlanta. They used when I was growing up, the estimate was 8,000 casualties.
Yeah, because I think that was Sherman's estimate. Yeah,
that's another thing to keep in mind too. One of the misconceptions about Ezra Church, which comes from Sherman, is that Sherman visited the line, saw the heavy losses, and said, "Oh, the men told me they had an easy time. It was just a massacre." That is not what most Union soldiers wrote at the time. A lot of them were impressed by the tenacity shown by the Confederates, who were just hurling themselves at them. And while two of Sherman's regiments did have repeating rifles, most didn't. But the volume of musketry that was used in this battle is insane.
Yeah.
They're just firing constantly. And remember, they don't really have entrenchments. When there was a break in the fight, they would set up they would try to do some entrenching. But this is not a heavily fortified position. And the tenacity shown by the Confederates really impressed them to the point where, get this, battle was actually marked by the Union. They actually had a marker for where one Confederate flag bearer planted his colors before he was killed, and then another marker for where one Confederate officer was killed and buried. And they buried that officer right at the furthest extent because that's how impressed they were. Those markers, by the way, got lost after the war. But yeah, so one of your first attempts at battlefield preservation happens at Ezra Church by the Union. And
yeah, it's a shame they didn't keep it up afterwards. And
yeah, exactly.
Battlefield's now gone, practically.
Essentially, we got a few little things there's a few parks there that have some that you can go to figure out some positioning. But yeah, it's the battlefield, like a lot of these, has been swallowed up. But one thing about Ezra Church is, you got these heavy losses, and a lot of Union soldiers, and Howard believed this was the case, that this was the battle that fully broke the Confederates. They never again, at least in Atlanta, showed the same level of tenacity and grit. The Army of Tennessee, of course, will have one more throw of the dice at Franklin. One more time when they strike with that kind of power. But at Jonesboro, the accusation that what I've always read is that the Confederate attacks were feeble. And Hess believes that the Confederate Army's morale was hurt by Ezra Church significantly, but it recovered weeks afterwards because of Confederate victories in Virginia and the knowledge that Lincoln probably wasn't getting reelected as long as it could hold Atlanta. Echelberger says, no, the attacks at Jonesboro showed the Confederates had their backs broken. Hardee also believed that. Hardee thought Ezra Church truly ruined the Army. As far as the Federals go, they're impressed with their victory. It's some more good news even though Atlanta hasn't fallen, it's still some good news. And of all the battles, by the way, in the Atlanta campaign, this is the one that got 2 front pages in Harper's, like battle illustrations. So this one really gets trumpeted up north. And the last thing to note is Howard himself. Hess's account is super positive about Howard. Like, Hess thinks Howard's a bit underrated, and that he does great in Army command, that the men love him, and that Howard shifted around forces successfully during the battle. I think that's all well and good. I don't think Howard obviously won. Eckelberger, though, mentions one big mistake Howard made. He never brought up cannons. He never brought up the artillery. So the Union
that was because it's a terrain that they couldn't really put artillery in the heavy woods there, and so they just didn't really bother.
Yeah, I think Eckelberger, though, might have a point. I mean, they could have positioned artillery somewhere else, you know.
Yeah, maybe.
But this is, I mean, in the end, it doesn't matter. You know, Union wins and wins big.
Yeah.
Although I do think you can say there's one thing about this battle, though, as bad as it is for the Confederates. I'll say they at least get one good thing out of this battle. Sherman's advance doesn't completely stop. They do keep on moving by the flank. But the Federal lines are going to be along the Ezra Church battlefield and then moving south. So the movement to cut off the final rail line does stop at Ezra Church. You know, which that doesn't make it a victory. I'm just saying that it does that. And that's what Howard said as well. Howard said that, you know, by the ferocity of the attacks, we did have to halt where we were. You know,
I disagree with that, but I'm not sure we have time for it. I will say another. Because there's of course because I'd say the real point where that happens is at Utoy Creek, a few weeks later, where Shawfield and Palmer.
You mean Schofield, right?
Yeah, I will pronounce it however I feel.
Well, you know, I'll correct you every time, man.
Well,
so you think Utoy Creek is really the one where they stop?
Yeah, because that's like his last real attempt until the Great Jonesboro movement at the end of the month.
So I always thought Utoy Creek was more like a probe gone wrong. Am I wrong about that one? That's how it came off to me. Hello?
Oh, I think let me check. Yeah, he dropped. I think.
Yeah,
he
just dropped.
Signal.
Yeah.
I guess he'll probably be back in just a second. So.
Yeah, and then we can debate the finer points of Ezra Church and call it a night.
That sounds good to me.
Yeah.
I'll admit I don't know much about Ezra Church, but I guess that was probably the most intense battle, you would say, or.
No, I mean Atlanta's pretty damn intense, and I'd probably say so. But the thing about Ezra Church too is most of the fighting happens in a relatively confined area.
So yeah, Discord fucked up on my end. There's one thing I wanted to point out. Reading into Hood's plan for at least the grand plan for Ezra Church, it's kind of bizarre in a lot of ways because he planned to send out Lee's Corps on July 28th to just sit and hold the line, and then on the 29th, late on the 29th, only then send out Stuart's Corps to like move and get into position to attack instead of just doing it all in the same day.
Mm.
And it's also like odd because Hood arguably like screws up his own plan because on the morning of the 28th he delays the movement of Lee's Corps. Lee could have been in position well before Logan took up the heights around Ezra Church. But he's only sent around like 10 o'clock, I believe, which by the point he's at the battlefield, Logan's been in position about half an hour, I believe.
Mm.
So arguably Hood is heavily responsible for the disaster there.
Yeah, well, I mean, Hood didn't really stay in contact, and
yeah.
You know, and like me and Dave were saying, the nature of the orders meant that Lee was very much within his rights to attack, to secure the road, to make that flank assault happen with Stuart's men. I just think it's just really gutsy of Hood that he's trying it again.
Yeah, I will say one thing to note about Hood's performance going forward. Until November 30th, Hood constantly relies upon the skill of his subordinates and leaves them to control things on the battlefield while he just sits in the rear at some headquarters.
He was much more active in Atlanta, though. He moved around quite a bit during.
Yeah, mostly around hotels and whatnot. But I think he was overseeing the battle at Peachtree Creek. less so at Bald Hill, and even less so at Ezra Church, and definitely not at Jonesboro.
No, he's much more involved at Bald Hill, I'd say. I don't think he's that involved in Peachtree Creek.
Yeah. By the time of Peachtree Creek, he's content to just sit in Atlanta and leave the flanking maneuvers to subordinates. Yeah, Ezra Church.
Yeah.
You see this there. You see this at Jonesboro, and you kind of see this at Spring Hill during the Tennessee campaign.
Yeah, I guess after all those failures, that makes sense for Franklin. Yeah, good point there.
Yeah, and so by the time of Franklin, that's when he finally decides to take direct command, I'd say.
So my quick question is, Utah Creek or Utoy Creek, I thought was more like a grand probe that went wrong and not like a renewed offensive.
I definitely need to read more about that. The problem with Utoy Creek is that no one writes about it.
I mean,
it's kind of of course it's kind of a small battle, but it's like it's just always in the footnotes of other in other books about.
Well, I think of all the major engagements, I think it's the one with the lightest casualties.
I think Schofield loses 300 men in his attack, while Bate loses like 20 or something. Not sure about the exact casualties, but it's pretty light. It should have been like a way bigger fight, but Palmer had just been screwing about with the 14th Corps, not listening to the orders.
Yeah. Well, he didn't want to take orders from Schofield.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think we should get into that the next stream, but.
Yeah, but like we said, well, it's kind of funny you saying that because Thersites for the thumbnail shows the Battle of Utoy Creek.
I did.
I know. I didn't know there was actual drawing of Utoy Creek like that.
Somebody had
like an Osprey book or something.
Yeah, I don't know. I just thought it looked interesting, and then it was one I hadn't heard of, so I figured it might be a good conversation starter. Spread some awareness.
I couldn't find a battle map for Utoy Creek. I found one for every other engagement I was planning to talk about tonight, but not that.
That's hilarious.
Yeah, it's so obscure. No one gives a shit about it. I'm half mind to write like a small book about it. Honestly,
can we change are you able to change the thumbnail?
Yeah, I can do it after we're off the air. I can change it.
Yeah. I mean, there's any number of pictures from that time. There's actually, there's actually a pretty good painting of Peachtree Creek that was done in the 1990s.
Oh, cool.
I'll see about pulling that one up for you. It's a pretty cool one. It's got some good detail on it, But yeah. In that case, we'll you just go ahead and change the thumbnail because that'd just be too goofy.
Right. I mean, I didn't realize exactly how obscure it was because I figured if there's a drawing of it or at least a painting, it can't be that obscure. But
yeah,
no. When that came up, man, like when I saw this thumbnail, I was like, what?
No, because my original plan was to do basically just 3 hours about nothing but Utoy Creek and go into every company, but I didn't want to show off too much, so I decided to reel it in a little bit. But not my plans.
Thank you for reeling it in. All right.
Yeah. You're welcome.
I will say speaking of which, I do kind of apologize for the needless detail on my part. I'm kind of still inexperienced about this kind of content, so I know you're.
It's all right, man. Yeah.
Anyways,
for these sort of things, you go broad stroke.
Yeah.
It's so hard to follow a battle without a map, and that's just the way it is, man.
Yeah, it's also is partly my deep interest in the campaign as a whole. So I just have this giddy interest to just spew about every little detail that I have in the back of my brain. I don't operate with a script. I feel like I should, but I think that just make you sound phonier.
No, I mean scripts are good.
Or at least a guideline, I guess, in terms of things. But I'll definitely fix that next time.
Yeah, depending on the topic, that determines whether they use notes or not. Like for the tier rankings of modern generals, always have notes. For most of the ancient stuff, I usually have bare minimum stuff.
Yeah. What was I thinking? So before we go to super chats, I think we should have a discussion about what was the last real chance the Confederates had to win the campaign? Because I think by this point, after Ezra Church, that hope had lost. I've heard arguments that after Sherman crossed Chattahoochee, there's really no chance. But I have seen arguments that it was Peachtree Creek, the last real opportunity he had to retake the initiative, or Bald Hill, alternatively.
You can go with the Steve Davis thesis, as far as I can tell. The campaign was lost. The campaign was lost the moment Joseph E. Johnston was given command of the army.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I don't go with the thesis. Well, I there's one thesis I think Hess subscribes to it, that Jonesboro is the last real opportunity for the Confederates to turn things around. When, I've looked at that battle. There's no chance the rebels had there.
I think that I actually do mostly agree with the Davis thesis. The moment Johnston's in command, we've lost because he's a loser, And I think it's also just so stupid. I mean, Johnston really bungled operations at Vicksburg. I mean, poor coordination, defeatist from the get-go. I read Timothy B. Smith's book on the siege of Vicksburg, and man, he is really hard on Johnston. He literally thinks that Johnston gave up right away and moved out as soon as he knew. When he did move out, he moved out when he essentially knew that Pemberton was going to surrender. He knew Pemberton would probably surrender, and therefore he could say, "Well, I gave it a chance, but look what happened." I mean, that's. I don't know if I go that far with Johnston, but that's what Smith says, and I'm like, I mean, if that is true, my God, what a dereliction of duty, right? So this man's a loser. So I actually do agree with the Davis thesis that the moment Johnston's put in command of the army, you've lost the campaign. You put Hood in charge. I think we have some last slivers of chances there, right? And I don't think any of Hood's plans for Peachtree Creek and Atlanta, I don't think those plans were bad. Bald Hill, Atlanta, that one's very bold. The Peachtree Creek attack idea is actually, I think, a pretty good one too. Even Ezra Church to a lesser degree.
Yeah, I'd say that I agree on that. I'd say these three battles, at least in the grand scheme, are like Hood's best planned ones. It's just like the way he executed them were just abysmal.
And some has to do with this is why, whatever we're saying about Johnston, I mean, I'm being hard on him, but like Dave said, Johnston does have a well-working staff. He's able to anticipate and counter each one of Sherman's flank marches. But in the case of Hood's staff work is abysmal. And this goes, his chief of staff is Francis Shoup. And once again, Shoup was a superb artillery commander. Why is he a chief of staff? He should be with cannons all the time. But the only battle where he was on the field commanding cannons is just Shiloh, and he excels there. And he's never does that again. Now, he was Johnston's chief of artillery, and he did fine there. That's a good job for him. But Hood's staff work is abysmal throughout his tenure as Army commander. I mean, it's pretty bad in Tennessee as well.
Do you think that's largely because he was promoted so rapidly they didn't really have time to learn the ins and outs of how to run a larger staff on a strategic scale?
Yeah, but also temperamentally as well. Hood is Hood was an aggressive commander who had risen up through the ranks through battlefield actions. He was a young man. He didn't graduate very high in West Point. It's been noted that he didn't really read a lot of literature, but he did read a lot of Walter Scott.
Yeah.
And what I'm saying is that, Hood is by nature not a staff-oriented man. Never really was. Right. And that's why when he gets beyond division command, when he's a corps commander, he doesn't do very well. Yeah. This is beyond his abilities. Now, he can conceive of good tactical plans. I think Steve Davis is also right. Hood has a reputation as a guy who would hurdle his men at entrenchments. That's not actually what he did for the most part. If anything, when Sherman actually would attack somebody, he would do that, very foolishly most of the time. But that being said, while Hood has these good tactical plans, Doesn't necessarily have the staff to pull it off, or the subordinates either.
Yeah.
Think about the Confederate command turnover. I mean, Polk died. Hood was promoted, and his most experienced subordinate is Hardee, who really isn't that great to begin with, but is now in his career low point.
Yeah. I'd say this portion of the Atlanta campaign is Hardee's nadir as commander. He will improve dramatically after he's transferred out of the Army. I think he's just operating out of spite going forward. Because Hardee wants to wanted to transfer at this point. He did not want to serve under Hood. He asked Davis to transfer him out at this stage of the campaign, but Davis kept him in command until afterwards. I think in October he's finally relieved and sent to Savannah. But this is and so Hood's best commander, quote unquote, is actively does not want to be there.
Yeah. Oh, I'm sorry we're laughing, but man, that's unfortunate.
Oh yeah, we're gonna have a fun time when we get to Jonesboro.
I'm
really looking to have a fun time, but we are gonna have a fun time.
I'm not sure Hess would be right though, because Davis says that the Union already cut the rail line before Jonesboro was fought.
Yeah. I don't know what I think Hess was just saying that offhandedly, just to downplay the importance of July 22nd, because I think he was trying to counter Eckelbarger's claim that the Bald Hill was the day Dixie died, and in that after this point the Confederacy was doomed.
Well, it's funny because then that slaughter in the chapel, Eckelbarger says, well, this is kind of their last chance. They never really recover from this one.
Yeah. I guess the argument I think the argument there is that whereas at Bald Hill, Hood had a chance to do something big, at Ezra Church, he probably could have seriously damaged the Army of the Tennessee, but that was only a local thing.
Yeah,
I think Ezra Church is where the last thin chance Atlanta's going to hold disappears.
I mean,
they don't realize it until long. They don't realize that until long afterwards, of course. But
it's worth noting that they're not going to make another attack like that. The Army, Hood is never going to try to do anything like Ezra Church again.
Well, he does at Jonesboro, though. Though we will get into how that plays out, but.
I mean, think about it. They sell down to siege operations after this. Now, of course, as Castell's pointed out, Sherman can take Atlanta, Grant can't take Petersburg. Even though Grant has a better numerical advantage over Lee.
Yeah.
But Sherman's army is they're not destroyed, is confident. His men are veterans who have won almost every battle they've been in. I know some people can say about the Army of the Tennessee, they never lost a battle or a campaign. I'm like, well, yeah, they did, but not many. And so, and then, you got, you have so maybe Howard isn't exactly a military genius, but, you've got Thomas, David Stanley, Logan, Blair. These are all effective, experienced battlefield commanders.
Yeah. Yeah, and even when you get rid of Hooker, you got Alpheus Williams commanding 20th Corps. He's a solid commander for that. Honestly, deserved it permanently, but then they give it to Slocum, who's I do not consider highly.
Yeah.
I love his nickname was Slocum because he's a slow marcher. I do want to note one other thing about that, just as one quick comparison. If you look at say the Corps commanders that Grant has out in Petersburg, right? You have Horatio G. Wright, who is borderline incompetent and is only there because he's friends with Halleck. I will say Wright did do better under Sheridan, to be fair, but Wright is awful in the Overland Campaign in the early stages of pre-Petersburg campaign. He's terrible. You have Burnside, who him and Meade hate each other, and Burnside's got his good days, but his bad days usually tend to be really bad, like we see at the Crater. Hancock is suffering from his wound, and he's bitter. He's angry. He's getting to fight with his subordinates. His friendship with John Gibbon breaks apart during the Petersburg campaign. William F. Smith, who never met a superior he didn't criticize. I mean, the list just goes on and on. They're saddled with. Oh, and then you got like Benjamin Butler and the Army of the James. I mean, you just have. Sherman just has better commanders, more confident troops, and men who have not been through an absolute meat grinder. It's been a tough campaign, a lot of marching and some heavy fighting here and there. But look at the casualties, like you were mentioning. The total casualties for this campaign are, I want to say, don't even equal the total casualties for Wilderness and Spotsylvania.
Yeah.
And those happen within, what, 2 weeks of each other?
Yep.
Oh, no, I'm sorry. No, 1 week. Within a week. I'm sorry, roughly 10 days. The first 10 days of the Overland Campaign are bloodier than the entire Atlanta campaign.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, anyway, that's all I got for you.
Yeah, we should probably wrap it up.
Yeah, we will.
Chat, should we?
Very soon. So, one final note for me, I just wanted to say that I still say the Chattahoochee River was the last chance, just because being outnumbered, the Confederates would need to utilize their terrain more effectively to wear down the Union Army and prevent them from making it an open field battle, which effectively all these battles are open field, more or less. I mean, there's not a hell of a lot of terrain features that advantage one side over the other in these battles we've been looking at. So once the river's crossed, the Confederates are fucked, barring a miracle or a massive fuck-up on the part of the Union.
I think Bald Hill, there's a chance there. But there was a chance. Then, the Army got repositioned. 16th Corps got repositioned, and that could have been a disaster. And it's one of the criticisms I've read of Sherman is that he marched towards Atlanta with a guy like Hood in charge. He's a fighter, with his armies like fairly widely separated.
Just give him the opportunities to try to win some battles.
But what he was doing, though, if you look at it, Sherman's having the men march separately and then, march divided, fight united. But even then, I mean, he doesn't even give an order for Thomas to attack during Atlanta. And by the way, I'm sorry, Bald Hill. I'll use Bald Hill from here on out. I prefer saying Battle of Atlanta, but Bald Hill will be better for a talk like this.
Hess calls it the Battle of July 22nd.
That is so lame.
Yeah, that
is unbelievable.
It's a moving title.
Thanks, Earl J. Hess. But anyway, but no. So I see what you're saying with that one, that it makes it to where they're going to have to be field battles, and the Confederates, by the nature of where they're at, they have to attack. They can't settle down for a siege, because then it would be, as Lee would say, a mere question of time.
Yeah. Well, we're ready for super chats, gentlemen.
Yeah, yep. Sure. I don't have anything closing. Oh, I did have one quick question for you, man. You said you don't think Ezra Church. You thought it was Utoy Creek was the last attempt. So Utoy Creek is not a probe, in your opinion. It's meant to be an attack, like a main attack.
Yeah. Right? I think Sherman had higher hopes for it than things played out.
Okay, gotcha. Just wanted to ask you that. All right, I'm ready for super chats.
Okay, so our first super chat of the evening came to us from Blue Ram Tetra Shora, I think, or Tetraras Bora. He said 2 questions. What are your thoughts on Teek's ideas of the origins of Nazi ideology, communism, and Gnosticism? And this being Teek, the World War II channel guy. Also, you guys talk. Yeah. Also, you guys talk a lot about board games. What are your favorite war games?
I do the war game one real quick. I haven't played much in the last 2 years because I'm busy with writing, but I'm planning to get back on it. I would say some really good ones would be Hannibal, Rome versus Carthage, Napoleonic Wars by GMT.
Yep.
Yeah, those two really stick in my mind. those are both a lot of fun. There's this little game called Horse and Musket by Sean Chick. It's really good. You should try it out.
Okay, so
we're working on the Civil War. We're working on the Civil War volume right now. But no, those two immediately come to mind. You know what? Actually, let me pull this up real quick so I can think of one. What's always a good question is somebody asks me like, what is a really good game for a particular battle? And Dave Powell was just on. He also designs war games. I think I think he only designs Civil War games, though.
Okay, I didn't know that. That's cool.
Yeah, I probably should ask him.
I don't think I've played any of his because his tend to be like really involved. I mean, he's got a group in Chicago. Those guys are hardcore.
Oh shit! Okay.
You know, so yeah.
So we're just talking to the guy who is the, let's make sure we have a turn for
No, this is not the campaign for North Africa where your Italians are boiling pasta.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. I remember there's this one YouTuber called Veil of Fisk who's just joking about doing a fucking campaign North Africa video where he puts all his friends and forces them to play it.
Well, like I said, I've said before that apparently that thing was made for staff college. That's why it's set up the way it is.
Yeah,
I've read that apparently there was
apparently people in staff college used to play it.
Yeah, I've heard. This is just me reading the Wikipedia. Apparently, there was originally like a full team meant to design it, but within like the first few months, the team disbanded, and there was just one guy left, and he spent like a year finishing it, and the game is the result. And I see why. I think I understand why people left it, because holy shit.
A few other good ones. History of the World.
Yeah,
that's a fun one. For Victory in the Pacific, which I think just got up. Yeah, that one just got up at Admiral's War. That's a great one. No Retreat, the Russian Front. Wilderness War, which is about the French and Indian War. That's an excellent one. Also, if you want to do the Eastern Front, the two best games are Hold Fast, East Front, and No Retreat, the Russian Front. Both those cover the entirety of the Russian Front on the army scale for the Germans, front scale for the Soviets, and both those games are excellent. So yeah, no, those are a few other ones too.
All right.
What was the other one? That's the Teak one.
TIK. Yeah, his crazy stuff. Yeah,
the Imperator Knight. I mean, the guy who whenever he starts bringing out the libertarian economics, I just turn off the video.
Yeah, I mean, it's he always makes.
Yeah, if only the Nazis had implemented libertarian philosophy into their supply system, then they wouldn't be starving to death. They needed to put some big capitalists into charge of their supply lines, and everything would have been fine. What the fuck was
right?
He was making such a great. He was making a great argument about just how fucked up the German logistics system was, and just how difficult it is to actually set up logistics in general, especially in a modern war like that with limited resources. But then he comes up with his solutions, and it's just batshit insane.
Well, that's the thing is, we're talking a bit of shit about the guy, but I'm also
I love his videos. I say this as a fan of his.
Yeah, I was gonna say, look, the Operation Crusader stuff he did a few years ago. I mean, that was incredible. This Stalingrad series has been going on and on forever. He does some of the best work around, and also some of his non-Battlestorm stuff can also be really good. Like his discussion of Dresden, the Dresden bombing was excellent, and his idea about the Nazis as a form of socialism, I've become increasingly more sympathetic to. I see what he's saying there. He's it's an argument worth making. I think I think he might be right on that one. No, fuck, I'm gonna say it. I think he's right. I think it's a racialized. I think he's right. It's a racialized form of socialism. That's what it was.
Yeah,
I think he's right.
Yeah, now, people
don't know about that.
I kind of.
It's not Marxist. That's for sure.
Yeah, definitely not.
That's the thing is, communism is that comes from Karl Marx, right? Socialism is not. Marx didn't invent socialism. That predates Marx.
Yeah. Yeah, which is funny when everyone conflates socialism with communism. That's absolutely hilarious when that happens. I kid. It's not. It's painful.
Yeah. And I also think, I think he takes it too far. I think he is right that
Indeed.
that boy. No, I was gonna say this one. I think no, not that one. I think he might be dead on. No, the Nazism. He says Nazis aren't fascists or something. I'm like, no, it's an extremist, very German specific form of fascism, right?
Yeah,
that's what Nazism is.
I mean, there's a reason. There's a reason why Mussolini, Hitler, and Franco were admirers in some form or fashion of each other's accomplishment.
even though they didn't really work well together.
Well, why would they? I mean, each one of them saw himself as like the greatest man in history. So,
but that's the thing too. It's the same thing. It's a similar thing with communism. Maoism is a form of communism, but it's a particularly extreme form, and different than what you got through Leninism in many ways.
Right. Lenin or Stalin or Trotsky or all these other insane denominations. I'm a particular fan of the Sadists, by the way. I think they're onto something.
And the same thing with fascism. I mean, they're all related. There's an admiration there, but Spanish fascism is really different from Nazism in several crucial ways. And we're saying admirers of each other. Hitler didn't really like Franco.
No, and Franco felt the same way, but feeling was mutual there. I mean, each one of them thought the other was unimpressive and all that, but still, I don't know. I'm still very skeptical of the idea that the argument that he's trying to make, because a lot of times the evidence he'll use, because he'll have like 3 or 4 hour video, and I don't think I've ever got more than 30 minutes in the one, but a lot of it will be anytime the word socialism is used in a quote, he'll be like, "Oh yeah, game set match." So it's just he's very, very generous to himself about what is evidence for this argument.
I will say one of the things I appreciate most about like Teak, I know the joke about stick to tanks and that he does go off the rails. I think in general, in principle, he's right to incorporate the political influence on military matters, because a lot of the earlier videos, of course, by other YouTubers before him, kind of just took a lot of shit that German general said for granted, and of course when he came about, there was also a lot more YouTubers that were coming out saying, "Oh yeah, no, a lot of these generals are also full of shit." But he was the only one going like in complete depth explaining like why a lot of the Wehrmacht narratives were kind of just garbage.
Yeah.
Like the whole like destroying the Church of Manstein.
Yeah, no, that was great. I did enjoy his work on that subject for sure.
I mean, sometimes it gets a little far. Sometimes I'm like, hey, come on, I think Manstein did fine here, okay?
I will say in a lot of ways, I think Manstein is in a lot of ways similar to Joe Johnston in that he's kind of held up as this like counter figure to whereas Johnston's a counter figure to Lee and Davis. Of course, Manstein's a counter figure to Hitler. Just like, oh, if only this guy was put in charge, then all this disaster wouldn't have happened. And these people just don't understand what they're talking about.
Yeah, no, they don't. No, they don't. Although Manstein's kind of he's a weaker counter figure than some other ones I think of. But no, I tell you what, for the question that was asked, I watched some of that video and I didn't really think much about it afterwards. So I'm agnostic on it. I do know that for a lot of people, especially people more conservative bent, I found Gnosticism is a dirty word. I do know that. So
I barely even understand what it is. Yeah. I imagine they also don't understand either.
I am so not in the mindset to get into that.
I don't want to lecture tonight at literally midnight where I'm at.
Yeah, I mean,
midnight where you're at.
Yeah, same here. But so I'm assuming Gnosticism is probably not the Christian practices of the 2nd and 3rd centuries, then.
No, they're talking about Greek philosophy.
Oh.
Yeah. You have to watch the video and then give me your opinion.
Okay, yeah, that's something I do know about is Greek philosophy, so I could.
Yeah. Why don't you read it and see about that one? What's our next super chat?
Our next super chat, this one, the one for Dave, we did earlier, and the next one after that is from Robert499. Thank you, Robert. He said, question for Sean, who do you think was a better Corps commander, Thomas or Longstreet?
Thomas.
Yeah, agreed.
I think nothing against Longstreet. Longstreet did some amazing stuff, but I think that from what I can see, Thomas is just... Longstreet actually accomplished some more impressive feats, but Longstreet was also in a hell of a lot more battles. And I find that Thomas, though, has because Thomas, I think one reason is Thomas served in infantry, artillery, and cavalry, so he has an understanding of all three branches in a way that almost no other general has. And he was just much better at working with others. And, Longstreet could be difficult. I mean, he was lucky to be under him, and Lee really got along. But you look at Longstreet when he's not under Lee. He doesn't do that well.
Yeah, abysmal, to say the least.
Yeah.
When he's under Bragg, when he's on his own in Knoxville.
And also, Longstreet had his share of command controversies. Thomas generally avoided that. The only one that Thomas had some controversy with was Buell. And, that's the thing, too. That's one of the reasons why Thomas doesn't get command of the Army after Perryville is, Lincoln really didn't like it when Thomas said no. Now, Lincoln eventually, recognized his accomplishments at Chickamauga, and Grant is just so eager to replace Thomas. Lincoln is one of the guys going, do you really want to do this?
Yeah. I love having that insane conversation on CWT where this one Grant fanatic was trying to justify Grant trying to remove Thomas because he failed at Nashville to destroy the Army of Tennessee.
Oh,
and
God, man.
That was just the most insane conversation I think I've ever had with another human being. Oh, so detached from reality, man.
The Grant fanatics in CWT, I'm just so he's the new Marble Man, huh?
I am so I've been playing it smart in the Atlanta sub forum that I host there, just talking about numbers and shit, and I avoid all the crazy people that way.
Good move,
the only time that backfires is when Bryce comes online to give me cryptic messages.
No, man. Oh God, no. It's
Bryce. If you're somehow watching this, I'm really sorry for the negative comment there. You're cool and all that. Wish meet again. We can be more sociable.
He's one of the best researchers. One of the best researchers around. He's just difficult.
Yeah, I agree on that. Yeah.
Look. I know him a while, man. Me and everybody say the same thing. It's eventually there will be a moment where you will get angry at Bryce and tell him to fuck off. It's inevitable. But no, great guy, very smart, and I agree with a lot of his observations about things. And it is kind of fun to have a guy who thinks both Grant and Lee are idiots.
Yeah,
that's just kind of fun.
Yeah, I'm not that extreme, but I'm not that extreme. But I will say I don't think Grant and Lee are these superior captains, the greatest generals that this continent have ever seen. I do think that Lee is...
we'll ever see.
Dude, I think Lee is a slightly battered tactician, but...
Let's have this Bryce guy on.
Oh, God.
And then pair him with someone who either rides meat for Grant or Lee. And just let them go.
Rides meat, huh?
Yeah, I will say... I remember there's this one book that claimed that Longstreet was somehow this modern general because he had this mindset for defensive warfare. I think it was the argument. I haven't read it myself, but I get the feeling that Longstreet's a bit more overrated, especially recently. Partly because he's later turned Leaf and became a Republican after the war.
So also got unfair. He also got blamed for stuff they didn't do.
Yeah, there's that, but again, you have shit like Wahatchee and you have Knoxville and all these other things on his record.
Yeah, I do have to say though, the Longstreet Lee partnership that was a very successful one. So that's worth noting. So that's why I say with Thomas, I just think he's a more complete tactician. Showed a better ability to work with others.
Yeah.
Yeah. And not slow. Thomas is not slow. I've seen no evidence that he's actually slow. None at all. Is he like lightning fast? No, but he's not slow. All right. Yeah, simple as that.
All right.
That whole like Thomas is slow thing. That's like the one about Napoleon being short. It's like, no, that's just not
is it just more of a stock accusation to be like, well, here's why Thomas is not one of the truly great generals, is because he's slow.
Yeah, well, there's that, and there's also the fact that like his nickname was Old Slow Trot, and I believe that stems from like his days at West Point, I believe. Because that was always the march that he called while he was training his cadets on horse riding, and so that's where he got his nickname.
Exactly.
Not because he was like slow in combat.
And he himself, like personally, was kind of a slow guy. You know what I mean? Like he didn't talk fast, he didn't move fast. But when an army's on the march, I really haven't found any evidence that he's tardy, in particular. And people, what about pursuit? I'm like, well, he pulled off one of the best sustained pursuits of the war, which is after Nashville. I can tell you about a bunch of battles where Grant didn't pursue,
like Shiloh.
Yeah, like Shiloh. There's no follow up after Shiloh. Oh yeah, wait. Last one about that. Yeah, Grant's idea of pursuing at Shiloh was to send a few cavalry regiments and division, which was fresh, but then some of Sherman's regiments. I'm like, Sherman's men? I mean, they were under fire at like 7 a.m. and they fought throughout both days, right? So it's really like being like, Helm, who are the most worn out troops in the army? Let's go send them out in pursuit. But Fallen Timbers, that little fierce little fight was less pursuit and more just more. I think it was more like a probe to find out where the Confederates were and if they were fully retreating back to Corinth or if they were going to maybe set up shop south of Shiloh, which probably would have been smart in many ways because the terrain there was so very much favored defense. But anyway, we got another one.
Yes, our last one comes to us from Old Man from Berlin for $2. Thank you, Old Man. And he says, thanks for the stream, guys. Iraq's war stream win. I guess he never clarified if he meant the first or second, but I assume probably the second because it's more involved.
Yeah.
But I don't know. That one might be more of a depressing topic that would just be more of a rant or series of rants than...
You mean like a war of choice that went nowhere?
Yeah, and that just had phases that were kind of all the same, really, despite the claims of like, oh yeah, Petraeus, what a genius. His idea of the surge. If we have more troops, we can do more.
Yeah.
Military genius right there.
No, but I mean, I guess he did have ideas, to be fair. I mean, I'm oversimplifying. There were ideas built into this, like more roadblocks, more systematic checkpoints, blah, blah, blah. But overall, the idea of the surge mostly is if we have more troops, we can get more shit done, which I feel like is not that hard to figure out.
Well, he made more of a effort at local diplomacy.
Yes.
And yeah, like you're saying, so the counterinsurgency tactics were better and everything. I mean, yeah, Petraeus, I don't know a ton about the guy. He seems personally pretty odious, the shit that he's done.
Right.
Yeah, apparently he really holds Congress in very low regard, which I don't necessarily blame him for, but you know what I'm saying, like, but yeah, no, Petraeus just strikes me as he's a talented military commander. But I've heard other people say, like, if you're around him, that he is just, a pretty arrogant son of a bitch.
Yeah, I don't know any. I've met one person who I don't think they know him personally, but they're in the army, and they've studied his counterinsurgency tactics, and they also are counterinsurgency guys, so they actually think that his reputation is warranted in terms of his knowledge of counterinsurgencies broadly.
Yeah, no, I mean, no, that's what I'm saying. Talented guy. Don't know about military genius. I mean, what about Norman Schwarzkopf? That guy was a genius, right?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, he took a really excellent army that was massively overfunded, and he beat the fuck out of a third world country with it. So, I mean, he must be
whose army had just been blasted to pieces in a 10-year war.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. I mean, fifth largest army in the world still, but
fifth largest army, but in terms of quality, I don't know where they'd rank on the list, but definitely wouldn't be fifth.
Yeah, no. Yeah,
although
it's really insane
I had read
to read
somewhere, they didn't realize how good the Abrams tank was. So I remember reading somewhere they were like, yeah, if we know how good it was, we actually just would have not fought. I do want to say that one as well. Some people, when they look at that, will say that, well, the Gulf War showed that if we'd fought the Soviets, we would have destroyed them. I'm like, well, I don't know about that. Because you have to deal with their air defense systems. They're going to know their weapon systems better. The other one, too, was the Soviets were going to use nukes, chemical weapons from the very get-go. Like, they were not going to wait for us. They were going to use nukes pretty freely.
Yeah.
If they get attacked.
Yeah, I love reading about like the Soviet like tactic for if a war starts. Just starts using tactical nukes and hope that the West doesn't decide to counter it with general nuclear warfare.
Yeah, the sweep. If the Soviets sweep into Western Europe, one guy said, if you look at how it's going, they essentially want their soldiers to walk through a blasted nuclear hellscape.
Yeah. You're describing something that sounds like it's from a 50s like army training movie before they really understand the effects.
Yeah. Well, they also. I remember reading that one guy we could only speculate, and we had our intelligence sources, but we didn't fully know what they were going to do. We did know about the chemical weapons. We knew they were going to use those pretty freely. The nukes was a bit of an open question. So there was one NATO officer who said, when we finally got to look at East Germany joins West Germany, they open up their files, so they get to look through what the plan was, and they're like, wow, we didn't know they were going to nuke that freely. We thought they might show restraint there or something,
Yeah. Yeah, I do find it darkly hilarious, that story about MacArthur asking for a small loan of 50 nukes to drop on the Yalu River.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's just the most casually insane thing I think I've ever read a military generalist just ask for.
Yeah.
Damn.
Yeah, thank God he was moved. Thank God. Yeah, he definitely need to do it. I think it would be a very fun stream for you guys to do, because I know you, Sean, definitely love MacArthur just so much.
Oh, he's so great. He's so amazing.
Yeah.
I mean, he's what is it, months behind schedule and retaking the Philippines?
Yeah.
So he takes down Yamashita,
but having the Philippines in the first place.
Yeah. All those bombers, man, they're still in Clark Field.
Yeah.
Yeah,
had a larger force, but gets defeated by a smaller force of Japanese troops.
Yeah,
led by a very incompetent general.
Was he incompetent?
Hanma, wasn't he?
Yeah, Hanma. Was he?
I've
heard some criticisms of Hanma. Okay. I mean, I don't know. Sometimes you hear these things and then you look into it and you go I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, wasn't the argument he had for the whole Bataan March that he was involved was because he didn't know about it, and they're like, you had your headquarters right next to where they were marching through. But a lot of people say that that just reveals just how out of fucking touch he was.
Wait, explain that to me exactly.
I think you made that argument when you were doing the Japanese general stream, or I may be talking about a different. Who was the commander in the Philippines during the initial invasion, the Japanese one?
I believe that's Hanma. I'm going to look it up real quick. I mean, I haven't really thought about this one in a while,
Yeah.
So give me 1 sec here. I'm going to check something. So I said something about his headquarters. What was the deal with his headquarters?
Something about on the it was posted on a road near where a bunch of U.S. troops were marched through on the Bataan Death March. Yeah, and people were, and at his trial, that's where prosecutors pointed to. Hey, he definitely should have known about this if it were that close.
Hama. I think his name is Hama. Yeah.
Yeah, Hama. I thought it was Hanma, but
same. No, I did too, but no, it's Hama.
Yeah.
No, he didn't do so great. That's right.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But hey, it's just one of those campaigns where idiot fights idiot, right? Of course, I'm saying that. I mean, maybe Hama just made a mistake, or I'm sorry. What I'm saying about that is that maybe Hama was just average or something. I mean, being fair though, a Japanese army. I mean, they had their share of really good officers, but same with the Navy. There's a lot of incompetence at the top.
Yeah,
because I mean, a lot of it's political, based on what your family was or who they are.
Yeah, who's favored by the military junta? There's just another reason why military juntas are stupid.
Yeah, and in the case of the Navy, the other problem you run into is a preference for officers who had staff positions. Although, one thing I thought was interesting with the Japanese Navy is they did tend to want their naval officers to have commanded various different types of ships. But what I have noticed is that destroyer commanders did not seem to have as many high-ranking positions. Like, typically, when you look at their records, they were in command of like a cruiser and a battleship or something like that. Anyway, anything else, guys?
No, that's it for me. I'm just glad the internet held out the whole time. I know it's been a little on the blink the last probably 3 days or so.
Yeah. Well, Discord did crash on my end there for a good chunk of it. So, well, for a brief moment, more like, but
yeah. All right. Well, gentlemen, thank you, and we'll reconvene at some future date for part 3 of the Atlanta campaign. So, till then, I'm Thersites, and I bid all of you good night. So let me close this out, and we will go to bed.